This is the story of almost any guy's dream. Our hero's ship is shipwrecked, and he finds himself on a remote deserted island with a girl. Luckily, he doesn't have to worry about food, water, and shelter, because he has a survival and development system. Building a fire, making a first shelter, finding food, growing plants, hunting animals, taming a bear, discovering new survivors, moving to a higher stage of civilization, building a raft, and traveling. You will see all this in this fascinating story about the evolution of civilization from scratch. Let's find out how it all started. The scene opens on a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. Gao was confessing her feelings to Lin, and people around them were urging her to accept. Everyone was recording the moment, and there was a buzz of excitement. Ahibak commented that since Gao was a top student, she would surely land a high-paying job, while Lin, with his impressive talent, would likely compete with international companies. Meanwhile, Chin was watching a live stream of a man announcing that he was heading home and would meet everyone later. Chin turned off his phone, feeling relaxed. He found the man's commentary fascinating and felt he could watch it indefinitely without getting bored. However, he soon noticed that the weather was deteriorating rapidly. Rain poured down, and lightning flashed across the sky. The captain instructed the passengers to take cover inside as the storm intensified. As Chin made his way indoors, he realized it was already too late. Panicking, he began to run. A fellow passenger asked why he was fleeing, but Chin didn't answer. Grabbing a life ring, he jumped off the ship just before it sank into the tumultuous waters. As he reached the shore, a wilderness system was activated, and he received a newbie gift, though it was stored temporarily as he was unconscious. Upon waking, he was relieved to find that he had survived, thanks to the life ring that had saved him from drowning. He observed that the island seemed deserted and concluded that the rescue and search team would arrive within 5 days if there were no mishaps. He knew he needed to survive on the island for at least 6 to 7 days before help could come. The island was dotted with coconut trees, which he hoped would sustain him for more than a week. He was also pleased to find a knife, which he had seen in the man's videos, though he hadn't used it yet. After cutting open a coconut, he discovered it was quite old, with very little juice. He realized he would need at least 5 coconuts to get through a single day. While drinking the coconut water, he recalled hearing something about the system while he was unconscious. Suddenly, a screen appeared before him, offering him the option to view his gift. Initially shocked, he touched the gift icon and discovered that it included a book on common plants and a book on common animals. He wondered what he would do with the books, but he thought that if this were part of a game, he might become well known by playing it. The gift seemed to be integrated into Chin. He felt as if he had acquired some additional, unfamiliar knowledge. He realized that the system's books had been implanted in his mind. Suddenly, he heard someone screaming. Shocked, Chin wondered if there was another person on the island. He rushed over and saw a snake heading towards Lin, a fellow student from his school. She was crying out for help, so Chin quickly grabbed the snake and smashed it against a tree to kill it. Afterward, he turned away from her. She asked who he was, but he told her to get dressed. Lin, understanding the awkward situation, requested that he not look. Once she had changed, she reflected on how she had been trying to dry her clothes after coming from the sea and hadn't expected to encounter a snake. When she noticed Chin sitting with coconuts, she was struck by how upright and self-reliant he seemed, especially after saving her. She wondered if he hadn't returned to check on her because she wasn't looking her best. Introducing herself as a university student, she was delighted to learn that Chin was also from the same university. Her happiness was evident as she grasped his hand. After drinking some coconut water, Lin noted that although it was sour, she was incredibly thirsty. Chin was surprised to see that she drank more than he did. He then asked if she had any way to contact others, like a cell phone. Lin replied that all her belongings had floated away when she fell into the sea. But Lin encouraged Chin, saying that thousands of people had died in the accident, so the rescue and search team would surely come. They both had to hold on to that hope. Chin found it unusual for someone to be so confident in such a dire situation. He suggested that, while waiting for the rescue team, it would be wise to prepare a fire for the night to keep insects and snakes away. Lin agreed and asked how to start a fire. Chin explained that making fire required a certain skill. He demonstrated how to create fire using wood and sticks, and mentioned that, since they were by the ocean, they should also search for any lighters or useful items that might have washed ashore from the cruise. An hour later, as they walked along the beach, they found nothing. Chin thought that Lin was right. Since their graduation trip route wasn't far and the island was uninhabited, they would likely find something eventually. However, as far as he could see, the area remained clean. Just then, Lin spotted a glimmering object and discovered it was an empty plastic bottle. As she was about to discard it, Chin asked her to wait and inquired about the bottle's significance. Taking the bottle from her, he explained that they could use it to start a fire. He gathered some sticks and leaves and used the bottle to concentrate sunlight on a specific spot. With some effort, he successfully ignited a fire. Lin was thrilled to see it. At night, they sat beside the bonfire, and Lin wondered when the rescue team would arrive. Chin noticed that Lin was no longer as optimistic as she had been earlier. He sensed her frustration, especially after they had found nothing. Realizing the importance of maintaining a positive outlook for survival, he decided to offer her emotional support. He reminded her that she had previously mentioned the rescue team would arrive in 3 days, and he was confident they would be home within a week. He reassured her that the abundance of coconut trees meant they wouldn't have to worry about food. Even if they only drank coconut water, they could survive for a week. Chin then took the snake and knife, and Lin asked what he intended to do with them. Chin began to cut up the snake, and Lin was horrified, asking if he planned to roast it for food. Chin confirmed that they now had meat. Lin refused to eat it, even if it meant starving. Chin was perplexed by her refusal to eat the food. As he cooked and ate the meat, Chin declared it was quite tasty. Lin, hesitant at first, eventually tried it and found it to be really good. Chin was grateful that they had the snake, otherwise they would have gone to bed hungry. He thought that the system had closed on its own, and Chin had no idea how to reopen it. Suddenly the screen reappeared, showing that he had earned 100 points for making the bonfire. He was shocked to see this. Lin noticed his reaction and asked what was wrong. Chin downplayed it, saying it was nothing, and wondered if he was the only one who could see the system. Lin mentioned that he had startled her and that she had been worried they were in danger. Chin reassured her, believing that someone would definitely come to rescue them. He noted that it was difficult to understand a person in just a day and was cautious about revealing the system. He feared that if Lin learned about it, she might leak the information, potentially leading to inquiries about him. Therefore, he decided to keep his guard up and not share anything about the system. He then checked the tasks and found that they resembled a game. Curious about what he could do with the 100 points, he explored the system store. The store had many items, but he could only infer their functions from their names. Among them, he found an 18+ item that intrigued him. He thought it might be amazing, but also wondered if it could turn out to be worthless for him. He discovered that the lowest priced items required 2,000 points, so he decided not to purchase anything for now. He also couldn't find a way to accept new tasks within the module, which suggested that he would need to explore the island slowly. They lay down to sleep, and Chin mentioned that although they were sustaining themselves with coconuts, which provided only carbohydrates, they were lacking in protein. He suggested they explore the land and search for shrimp along the coastline when the tide receded the next day. As he got up, he noticed that Lin was sleeping soundly and seemed unconcerned about their situation. Qian decided to discuss their plans with her the following day. In the middle of the night, Chin woke up feeling cold and noticed that Lin was shivering beside him. Her body felt icy, and she was too exhausted to sense the chill. He gently woke her, and she startled at seeing him so close, quickly stepping back and asking what he was doing. Chin tried to reassure her that she was misunderstanding the situation, but Lin accused him of harassing her, saying she had thought he was a good person. He turned toward the fire and suggested that if she didn't want to stay cold, she should move closer to it. Reluctantly, Lin moved to sit by the fire. Chin observed that the temperature difference between day and night was extreme, which was unusual given their proximity to the equator. The cruise line was close to the equator, and the warm climate meant Lin had not brought any thick clothes. He suggested that they hold each other to stay warm, otherwise they might freeze. Lin hesitated, unsure if she could bring herself to do that. She had never been this close to a man before, and if it weren't for Chin, she wouldn't even have had a fire. After a moment of thought, she got up to remove some clothes, telling him not to look. As she braved the cold, she recalled scenes from movies where people huddled together for warmth in cold places. Qian told Lin not to worry about removing her clothes since they didn't have any thick clothing to trap heat. Instead, he suggested they simply sit close together for warmth. He hugged her from behind to share his body heat, and they spent the rest of the night like that. When morning came, Lin woke up to a beautiful sunrise and excitedly asked Chin to come and see it as well. Chin noticed that the tide was ebbing and suggested they go collect crabs for breakfast before the tide came back in. While they were gathering crabs, one of them bit Lin's hand. Chin quickly grabbed a rock and used it to crush the crab, rescuing Lin from further injury. They managed to collect a good amount of crabs for their breakfast. Chin was removing the shells from the crabs when Lin asked why he was doing that, as there was a lot of meat in the shells too. She had been feeling hungry since last night, and her stomach was growling. Chin explained that while they would have some crab meat, there wasn't much to be had. Lin wondered why, given that she had also collected half of the crabs. Chin revealed that the crab meat was very cold, which might cause a stomachache if consumed in large quantities. Additionally, the shells were coated with gastric juice, which could add unnecessary burdens to their digestive systems. As they roasted the crabs, Lin commented on the pleasant smell and suggested that it would be better with some sauces. Chin then mentioned that they wouldn't be sleeping on the beach that night. They needed to build a camp to shield themselves from the freezing wind. Lin asked about the forest, and Chin agreed, but reminded her that the night temperatures would be deadly if they stayed on the beach. He suggested building the camp in the forest, where there were abundant trees and materials. They might even find additional food there. Lin agreed and asked if they could head into the forest after the meal. Chin declined, explaining that they needed to prepare enough fresh water and leave a distress signal in case a rescue team arrived. Lin expressed concern about the danger of climbing the tall coconut trees. Chin assured her that he would handle it and then removed his belt. Feeling a bit uneasy, Lin inquired about his plans. Chin explained that he intended to use the belt to climb the tree. He began the climb, finding it more challenging than he had anticipated. It was difficult to work with just his hands, and he felt that he would be in serious trouble if he wasn't careful. Despite the fear and difficulty, he managed to reach the top. Once there, he called out for Lin to move away. After she had moved to a safe distance, Chin shook the tree to make a large number of coconuts fall. He then collected the coconut water in a bottle, finding it to be much more abundant than the previous day's supply. As they were preparing to leave, Chin noticed Lin holding some coconuts and asked why. She replied that the water inside was very fresh, and since Chin had worked hard to obtain them, she didn't want to waste them. Chin suggested that she should take only a few, as consuming too much could make her sick. After making an SOS sign on the beach, they headed into the forest. Chin reflected on how, while watching the video, he had thought it would be interesting to survive in such a setting, and that it would be a good experience. However, now he just wanted to return to his comfortable bed. He felt as though countless unseen, vicious creatures were watching them from the dark corners of the forest. Lin drank some water, touched her lips to the bottle, and then handed it to Chin. She advised him not to touch the cap with his lips before drinking. Chin wondered why she made that request. Lin explained that, even though he might think she was being overly cautious, she noticed he was constantly scanning the low shrubs and searching for something. Chin revealed that the snake they encountered the previous day was a red cynonatrix, a species that usually lives in freshwater but sometimes comes ashore to hunt for food. Lin asked if that meant they were near a freshwater source. Chin confirmed that they were. Lin then pointed out that the forest was vast, and finding the water might be challenging. She advised against taking unnecessary risks. Chin thought relying on luck was futile and not a viable strategy. They didn't have special skills to detect hunger like Ed did. He asked Lin if she noticed any signs of a path through the bushes. They observed broken leaves and branches, indicating a direction that seemed to be a path used by animals. Lin agreed, noting that animals also need water, so it's likely they were following a trail left by animals heading to a water source. Chin teasingly praised her observation. Lin replied that sometimes she didn't feel like he was genuinely complimenting her. Chin assured her that he wasn't trying to flatter her. As they continued walking, Lin asked why Chin knew so much about the wilderness. Chin explained that he was a fan of outdoor activities, though he lacked practical experience. He thought the forest was vast, and if they didn't find water soon, he would need to start a fire by noon. As they were following some sounds, they eventually discovered a small river. Lin was thrilled to discover the water sources. Chin quickly washed his face, grateful they had found water so quickly and wouldn't miss the best time to start a fire. He noticed Lin was collecting water but not drinking it, as it was raw and likely to contain bacteria. He was surprised that she was considering such details in that situation. Afterward, they continued ahead, and Lin suggested setting up camp near the river rather than venturing into the forest. Chin explained that they might encounter wild animals, and that heavy rain could cause the river to swell. Eventually, they came across a large open area. Though it wasn't ideal, it was suitable for their needs. Chin instructed Lin to collect wood for the camp, while he prepared to make a fire. Lin looked around for wild leaves. If she couldn't find any, she planned to gather some shrub branches. Once Lin had left to search for wood, Chin found a lot of wood that was still moist. He decided to dry some of it and store it for future use in case they couldn't find dry wood later. After successfully starting the fire, he had an idea. He remembered that Ed had once sharpened stones by striking pebbles with his shoe. Ed then attached a sharp stone to a wooden stick, creating a simple stone axe. He began sharpening a stone, realizing it was an emergency and he didn't have much time to craft a proper stone axe. As he cut the wood, he found it difficult and time-consuming taking about half an hour per tree. Fortunately, he only needed to chop down one more tree of similar size before he could search for smaller pieces. By evening, he had managed to cut down only 9 trees and needed to return to camp before nightfall. Carrying the logs back to the camp, he remembered working on his sugarcane farm during summer vacation. He had often carried sugarcane all afternoon, never expecting that experience to be useful here. When he arrived back at camp, Lin was standing by the bonfire. She showed him some plantain leaves and explained where she had gathered them, though they were so tall that she could only collect the leaves near the ground. Together, they started setting up the camp. They used knots to secure each joint between the logs. Lin pointed out that the bark would strengthen the ropes as they used them. Chin focused on recalling how to properly structure their camp setup. Lin asked if they would use the bark to bind the leaves to the wood as well. Chin shook his head, explaining that they needed to cut a hole in the leaf's base with the dagger, which would then attach securely to the wooden frame. He proceeded to cut the thickest stake in half, sharpen it to make a proper stake, and then drive it into the ground. He placed the windbreak wall on the stake to form an inclined plane. Lin seemed disappointed and questioned if this was their camp. She asked why there was only one wall. Chin replied not to underestimate the setup, noting that even with just one wall, it would direct the heat from the bonfire towards them effectively. Chin received 1,000 points for setting up the camp. He then checked the screen. Lin inquired about what would happen next. Chin explained that they would soon feel warmth all over their bodies, and he reflected on how he never expected to be mocked by a system. Then they boiled some water. Chin warned that plastic bottles could release toxic substances when heated, but since they didn't have any other option, and Lin wasn't afraid of dehydration, she drank the water and then passed it to him. After Chin drank his share, he reflected that with the camp set up, they didn't need to worry about getting cold. Now, they needed to focus on finding food. There were 2 known sources of food: coconuts and seafood. However, both were located on the beach, which was a half-hour walk from their camp. They wouldn't be able to catch the ebb tide in the morning. The coconuts would only provide carbohydrates and little coconut meat, which wouldn't be sufficient for their needs. Chin decided to check the plantain field, hoping they might find some plantains. Just then, a mosquito landed on his hand, and Lin slapped it away quickly. When Chin asked about it, Lin explained that she had acted fast because of the mosquito. Chin realized that they were dealing with wolf mosquitoes, which were particularly aggressive. Normally, bites from these mosquitoes would cause people's skin to become red and swollen for several days, and being bitten by many could lead to allergic reactions or fever. Concerned, he decided to take action. As a swarm of mosquitoes gathered around Lin, Chin made a whistling sound to attract them all. He then used smoke to drive the mosquitoes away from their area. Lin asked why the mosquitoes were drawn to him after he made the sound. Chin replied that an old man had once told him about it, but he didn't fully understand the reason himself. Despite having the fire for warmth, they still felt cold. Shima noted that the surrounding trees were blocking most of the cold wind and concluded that setting up the camp in the forest had been the right decision. He advised Lin that there would be many more beasts in the forest, and it would be wise for them to take turns keeping watch at night. He found Lin asleep while sitting up, exhausted from a long day. Realizing she had been busy and needed rest, he decided to take over the watch. He gently laid her down and thought about making some ropes for future use. He started by separating the bark. The next morning, Lin woke up to find Chin sitting nearby. She commented on how early he had risen and noticed the rope he had made. Curious, she asked where he had obtained it. Chin didn't answer directly, but warned her that if she hadn't kept watch the previous night, he would have been in a bad situation. Lin apologized for the previous night and assured him she would definitely take the watch that night. Chin decided they should take turns keeping watch, as he doubted she could stay awake all night, given she had slept while sitting. They headed to the river, and Chin asked where she had found the plantain field. Lin replied that it wasn't far, only about 100 meters away. He then showed her some raspberries and asked if she thought they were tasty. Lin asked how he knew they were edible. Chin explained that if they weren't, she wouldn't have been excited. Lin tasted a raspberry and found it sour. He noted that raspberries typically don't ripen until April, so it was normal for them to be sour. Afterward, Chin revealed his plan for breakfast and mentioned that they would be eating plantains. Lin asked if the plantains would still be bitter since they were green. Chin admitted he wasn't sure but decided to break them off since they didn't have any other food options. Lin pointed out that the plantains were hanging high up in the trees and asked how he planned to retrieve them. Chin said he would give it a try, but bet that the tree wouldn't be able to support his weight. He used a stone tied to a rope, threw it towards the tree, and once it got lodged in place, he tried to shake the tree to make the plantains fall. Lin remarked that it was good the branches were soft and asked if he was all right. Chin showed her a banana and asked if she wanted to try it. Lin realized he was testing the fruit on her. Chin said he was being a gentleman by asking her first, but Lin thought he was being inconsiderate. After taking a bite, Chin found the banana to be very hard. Lin asked if it was unripe, or if they could store it for a while. Chin explained that it wasn't food at all. He showed her that the bananas they usually eat are cultivated varieties with degenerated seeds, whereas wild plantains have seeds that remain viable even when ripe, making them inedible as food. He then suggested they search for meat, which he claimed grew on plantain trees. He showed her the meat he was referring to, which turned out to be worms on the leaves. Lin wondered if they would be delicious. Chin found the idea a bit strange, but explained that these were plantain worms, which are commonly found hiding in the plantains. He noted that they contain 6 times more protein than beef, and when covered with breadcrumbs and fried, make excellent snacks for children. They returned to the camp and cooked the worms. Chin asked Lin to wait a bit longer before eating. He took a bite and found it was quite good. Lin tasted it as well and agreed that it was tasty. Chin regretted that they didn't have any oil, which would have enhanced the flavor. He commented that when people are starving, almost anything seems tasty, but Lin surprised him by refusing to eat the plantain worms. She explained that while she had tried fried insects from street vendors because of her best friend, she wasn't keen on the worms. Chin then asked Lin to bring the rope. She watched as he broke the bottle, realizing he didn't have the fishing trap he needed. He explained that on their way back, he had seen many fish in the river. With the trap he had, they could catch the smaller ones. Lin wondered how he planned to catch them. Chin explained that the trap was designed to let fish enter easily, but made it difficult for them to escape. He received 200 points for creating the trap. Lin then pointed out that their water container would soon run out. Chin suggested using coconut shells as a substitute. Lin mentioned that the shells would burn if used directly. Chin proposed placing a heated stone into the coconut shell several times, which would eventually boil the water. Lin asked if they needed to go back to the beach to get more coconuts. Chin agreed, but first they needed to set the fish trap. They set the trap in the river, and Lin suggested placing it closer to the camp, questioning why they had gone all the way there. Chin explained that there were many fish hiding in that particular spot. Lin then asked if he smelled something. Chin noticed a familiar scent and saw Lin walking towards something. She pointed out where the smell was stronger. They discovered mint, which could repel mosquitoes. Chin decided to gather some to plant near the camp. Lin agreed and suggested they take a lot of it. They collected the mint and planted it near the camp. Afterward, they took a rest, and Chin felt pleased that they had found the mint. Lin mentioned that mosquitoes would no longer be a problem. Chin then suggested going to the beach in the afternoon to get some coconuts. He made an axe and earned 200 points for it. He wondered if he could earn more points by creating survival items and thought that it might be easier to buy goods from the store. Lin questioned whether he was happy making things in their current situation. When they reached the beach, they found that the coconuts they had previously broken were all gone. Lin wondered if someone else had been stranded there like they were. Chin replied that it didn't look like a human had taken the coconuts. Lin speculated whether a lion or a similar creature might have taken them. Chin asked if she had ever heard of any beast eating coconuts. He then noticed footprints in the sand and identified them as crab tracks. He told Lin that these were likely left by crabs. Lin asked if this meant they were following the crabs. Following the tracks, they came to another tree where the traces ended, but there were no coconuts or crabs in sight. Chin instructed her to look at the tree. Lin observed that it was very large, possibly weighing around 4 kilograms. Chin picked up a coconut and suggested they leave. Lin asked if they could take the crab as well. Chin replied that the crab wouldn't come down easily, so catching it would be difficult. They moved a bit farther away and waited. Eventually, the coconut crab came down, and Lin urged Chin to hurry. Chin told her to stay calm, explaining that since the crab had eaten his coconut, he wouldn't let it escape easily. Lin commented that Chin looked like an evil character in this situation. Lin commented that it was easy for the coconut crab to open a coconut, but she hadn't expected it to be so effortless, almost like peeling a banana. Chin positioned himself in front of the crab, took the coconut from it, and scolded the crab, wondering why it was looking at him so defensively. He found it strange that the coconut crab was afraid of bright light, which was why they typically came out at night. The island itself felt peculiar to him. He noticed that the coconut crab could open another coconut quickly, so he took that one as well and teased the crab to make it chase him. Eventually, he managed to capture it. Lin asked him to slow down, as she was struggling to keep up. Chin explained that it was getting dark and urged her to hold on a little longer. Lin got on her knees, unable to walk because the coconuts were so heavy. Chin agreed to take a short break. He looked out towards the ocean and noted that the tide should start ebbing soon. He regretted that it was getting dark so quickly, but they still had time to search for seafood. Lin mentioned that it was their third day on the island, and no rescue team had arrived yet. She wondered if the search efforts had been called off. However, she encouraged herself, believing they would be rescued soon and that the team would definitely find them both after the shipwreck. She then suggested they head back. Chin shared her concern about being rescued, but chose not to show his worry. As they reached the river, Lin pointed out that there were 3 fish in the trap. Chin was pleasantly surprised, noting that it was more than he had expected. Lin remarked that if the bottle had been larger, they might have caught more. Chin asked Lin to return to camp to rest while he stayed behind to clean the fish. He thought that using the fish guts as bait would be advantageous, as the trap would remain useful for a long time without requiring constant attention. He earned an additional 500 coins for the fishing task, bringing his total to 2,000 coins. He considered what he might buy from the store with his newfound currency. As Chin returned to the camp, he saw that Lin was building a stove with rocks to cook the coconut crab, which was exceptionally large. She expressed her gratitude for catching the crab, noting that the 3 fish they had were not enough to satisfy their hunger. Chin explained that the trap alone couldn't meet their daily food needs, so their priority was to find more food sources. They cooked the crab, and Lin commented on how delicious it was, describing it as sweet with a hint of coconut flavor. Chin was impressed by the amount of meat, especially in the legs, which was more than he had anticipated. After eating, they prepared for the night. Chin reminded Lin to stay alert and guard the camp. She agreed, taking up a small axe, and hoped no beasts would disturb them. Suddenly, Chin put his hand on her shoulder. Startled, Lin swung the axe, demanding he stay away. Upon recognizing him, she admitted he had frightened her and asked why he had woken her since she hadn't called him. Chin told her to go back to sleep while he took over the watch. Lin offered to continue guarding and questioned whether he had slept enough, noting she had slept the entire previous night. Chin agreed it was a good idea, but he warned her to be careful not to swing the axe at him if she became too sleepy. With Lin settling down for the night, Chin sat by the fire and decided to check the store with his 2,000 points. Chin checked the water and found it still drinkable, thanks to the boiling process which had eliminated the bacteria. He felt more focused and clear-headed, appreciating the progress they had made. While checking on Lin, he saw that she was sleeping fitfully, mumbling about finally being rescued and expressing her belief that he would definitely come. It was clear that the shipwreck had deeply affected her mental state. Her strong facade was a cover for the emotional toll she was enduring. It seemed the ordeal had overwhelmed her more than she let on. Afterward, Chin decided to check the store. With his 2,000 points, he discovered only a few items were available. He felt he needed them all, as he was still lacking essential production tools on the desert island, and productivity was low. Among the items, he noticed a book titled Wolf Crafts Collection, which seemed to detail methods for crafting various tools. Given the circumstances, this book appeared to be a valuable resource. He purchased the book and received it immediately. As he reviewed its contents, he realized how useful it could be. If he could make all the items described in the book, he would have no trouble surviving on the island for a year, let alone a month. He also noticed a wheel for obtaining additional items, and he had a free chance to spin it. Chin felt that the day was turning out to be a lucky one. He reflected on the positive events that had occurred and decided to check the wheel he had obtained. He noticed that there were no blank spaces on the wheel, meaning every spin would yield something. Excitedly, he tapped the wheel to spin it. As it whirled at high speed, he hoped for something valuable. The wheel eventually stopped, and he recognized some of the items from the store that were worth at least 10,000 points. The system prompted him to confirm if he wanted to experience the reward. Chin was curious, realizing that these gifts might be rare and difficult to obtain otherwise, similar to the Krypton Gold games. He decided to keep the spin, as free gifts were always beneficial. The next morning, Lin woke up and looked for Chin. He returned with some freshly caught fish, and she asked him to inform her before leaving. Chin explained that she had been in a deep sleep, so he hadn't wanted to disturb her. He promised to let her know next time. While he fried the fish, Lin asked him not to go to the river, as she intended to bathe there. Chin advised her to avoid polluting the water and not to leave any scent behind. He noted to himself that girls often prioritize cleanliness, and that they hadn't bathed since arriving on the island, making them quite dirty. As Lin headed to the river, Chin considered whether he should bathe as well. However, he decided to prioritize eating first. He loudly announced that he would be searching for additional resources and asked Lin to call him once she finished bathing. Lin agreed, and Chin set off to explore. He spotted a tree and thought himself fortunate to find it. The time of year reminded him that he could find mushrooms for food, and with the system's help, He could also identify poisonous varieties. The resources around the camp were unexpectedly abundant. He had seen many fruits along his path. However, these were beyond the range of common plant collections, and he couldn't determine if they were edible. He heard a rustling sound and spotted a hare, which was moving at 70 kilometers per hour. It was impossible for Chin to catch it, and the chance of hitting it with his axe was slim. He threw the axe in an attempt to strike the hare, but it dodged easily. Chin decided to wait until the hare was distracted before trying again. The hare then sprinted away, and Chin realized he had been out for a while. Lin might have finished his bath by now, so it was time for Chin to return to the camp. He wondered which direction he had come from, but was relieved that the morning dew had wet the ground, leaving clear footprints. This made it easy for him to find his way back. As he arrived at the camp, he found that Lin had not yet returned, but he heard her screaming. He rushed to find out what was wrong. Lin was still in the river and told him there was a snake. Chin hurried to grab the snake and reassured her that it was just a rice field eel, which was not poisonous but good at burrowing. He told her to stay calm. Lin then asked him to leave, so he stepped away and decided to wait in case anything else went wrong. He also mentioned that their food problem for the day was resolved, as the eel was quite large, likely due to the island's natural environment. Lin wondered if Chin saw her like this, feeling embarrassed. She approached and questioned why Chin was staring at her. He replied that it was because she looked so beautiful. Feeling shy, she walked ahead, thinking about what was wrong with her. She remembered that at school many admirers had given her similar compliments, and she felt happy about such simple and direct words. Chin, on the other hand, felt that perhaps he shouldn't have said anything at all. He took off his shirt and noted that eels were not social animals. They didn't live alone in a body of water. He decided to catch all the eels in the area. He found that they all burrowed in the soil near the water, and with careful inspection, he might find their burrows. He saw one and noted that they generally have two holes, one at the bottom, which is close to the water, and another for ventilation. He blocked the bottom hole, as he couldn't directly reach his hand to catch the eel because other creatures, like river crabs, might also be present. Recalling the method he needed, he inserted a rope into the hole from above and felt a tug, as if someone was grabbing it. He then pulled the rope out, successfully catching the eel. Returning to camp, Lin saw that Chin had caught 2 more eels and asked if the food problem was solved. He reassured her that she was overthinking. He had searched everywhere in the water area and found only 2 eels. If he wasn't mistaken, there weren't any more. He thought that the 3 eels they had were quite large and would be enough to sustain them for several meals. It was fortunate that the small water area supported such a good supply of rice field eels. Lin asked if they should roast all 3 eels, but he replied that they wouldn't be able to finish them all at once. When she asked what he was planning, he explained that he would remove their skin and turn them into smoked meat, which would be more convenient for preservation. He mentioned that homemade smoked meat required a complex month-long process, including pickling, airing, and smoking. However, since they needed to preserve the eels for only 2 to 3 days, he would smoke them for just 3 to 4 hours. Lin came by and offered to help, feeling embarrassed since she was only resting while he was working. He told her that he would teach her how to weave hemp ropes. Once she mastered the technique, she could use the barks around the camp to make ropes, which they would use to build another wall to block the wind. Lin agreed, and Chin told her he was going to the river for a while and asked her to warm the stone stove for dinner. At the river, Chin found more fish and noted that he typically caught 2 or 3 each time. At this rate, he could collect 5 or 6 in a day, but this still wouldn't be enough for just one person. He thought that if they ate eel for the next 2 days, he could collect 10 or more fish in that time for future use, ensuring they wouldn't have to worry about food for 3 days. He noticed that the spring rains would soon start, and the camp wouldn't provide adequate protection from the rain, so they would get wet. He decided to use these 3 days to improve the camp. He adjusted the fish trap and by nightfall, cooked the food. He suggested adding some raspberries to the meal. After tasting it, Lin found the dish delicious. Chan then asked her if she was enjoying the food on the island. The next morning, Chin walked through the forest, noting that there was a lot of dew. Even though he had been out for only half an hour, his clothes were already soaked. He was grateful that he had left some marks during his previous trip, as they helped him avoid getting lost. In the last 2 days, he hadn't ventured out to search for resources because he had been busy improving the camp. The supply of rice field eels was finished, and only a few fish were left. He hoped he could catch a hare this time. The scene shifts to 2 days earlier, where Chin had destroyed part of the camp. Lin asked him why he had torn down the windshield. He explained that it was too small and he planned to build a larger one. He constructed a new gate and asked her to take over after she had secured the windshield. She understood that the new setup would help them stay warmer at night. Returning to the present, Chin thought about how their new, larger camp was much better and rainproof. He recalled that the hare had run in a particular direction and began searching for it. The Times Fomentarius he had brought out could still burn for another 2 hours, so he needed to move quickly. He reasoned that foxes usually hunt far from their homes, but if they were close to home, they would stay nearby. The forest had such abundant vegetation that hares didn't need to venture far from their burrows for food. After searching throughout the day, Chin found a hole and remembered that wild hares typically have more than one burrow. There must be other burrows nearby, so he needed to block the others if he wanted to catch the hare. He discovered 5 burrows and blocked them all. There were 2 left, so he decided to blow smoke into one of them. The hare would come out of the remaining burrow. He created smoke for one of the burrows and waited by the other hole for the hare. When the hare emerged, Chin caught it and found it was a small one. However, he noticed another hare rushing away. This one was larger. Upon inspecting the hole, he also discovered 3 small hares. After half an hour, he managed to catch all 3 and returned to camp with them. Lin was thrilled to see that he had caught all the hares. Chin mentioned that he planned to go to the river to handle them. Lin remarked on how cute they were and questioned how he could bring himself to eat them. Chin had forgotten that women generally have a fondness for cute animals. Lin suggested that they should fatten the hares up so they would provide more meat. He was shocked by Lin's response and thought it wasn't typical for girls to react that way. However, he agreed that fattening the hares up was a good idea. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought them back alive. Lin explained that they had no other choice because they needed to survive. Chin decided to eat the larger hare and fatten up the smaller ones. He took the larger hare to the riverbank to chop it. He noticed that the meat smelled unpleasant, so he needed to drain all the blood. After processing the meat, he kept the fur for future use. As they ate, Lin remarked that the hare was quite smelly. Chin suggested roasting the fish and keeping the hare for himself. He had hoped that the smell would improve after handling, but it still smelled awful. He then asked Lin what was making her so happy, hoping to share in the enjoyment. Lin reminded him that the next day was the 7th, the last day of their stay. Chin realized she was excited about being rescued. Lin asked if he was also happy about leaving. He agreed but wanted to ensure they made good preparations for their departure. After finishing dinner, Lin asked what he would do next. Chin said he planned to practice drilling wood to start a fire. Lin pointed out that they already had a fire. Chin replied that acquiring new skills was never a burden, and that it was always wise to learn more for future needs. He recalled the method for making fire and began his attempt. Initially, only smoke emerged from the bushes. Lin wondered if he was praying for success. After a while, Chin finally succeeded in making a fire. The next morning, Lin asked Chin why he had captured the hares. He explained that if they gnawed on the hares they might escape, but he had only done it to prevent them from acting rashly. He thought he had to lie to her. It seemed she firmly believed that the rescue team would come and had become immersed in her own hopes, her mind clouded with uncertainty. After an hour, they reached the beach, and Lin remarked that the rescue team had not arrived yet, suggesting they might have to wait a bit longer. Chin agreed that they had been waiting for a long time, so it was acceptable. Lin suggested they sit and wait for the rescue team. Chin felt that they might have to spend the night on the beach, so he began collecting wood and coconuts to get through the night. The wood drilling skill he had practiced the previous night proved useful. As evening approached, Lin expressed concern that the rescue team was taking a long time. She wondered if she had miscalculated the dates and if the next day was actually the 7th. She worried that the rescue team might have forgotten about them or given up. Overwhelmed with emotion, she grabbed Chin's hand and asked if they would have to die there. Chin reassured her that it wouldn't come to that. He asked her to calm down and then gently slapped her. Startled, she asked what he was doing. He told her to have a good, long cry if she needed to. Lin hugged him tightly and expressed her belief that the rescue team wouldn't come. Chin reassured her that it was okay. Even if the rescue team didn't arrive, he was there for her. The next morning, Lin slapped Chin and asked why he had slapped her the previous night. She also thanked him for his support. Chin replied that if she knew the reason for his actions, why had she slapped him in return? Lin explained that since he had slapped her earlier, she felt justified in slapping him back. He asked her to repeat what she had said, as he hadn't heard her clearly. Lin turned to him and noted that, according to their previous observations, the tide should have receded by now, but there was no sign of it. Chin explained that the exact timing of the tide's ebb wasn't fixed. Generally, the tide would ebb about 48 minutes later each day. Since they had been on the island for 6 days, it would take approximately 4.8 hours from their last observation for the tide to recede. He suggested they wait a little longer, and then they could head back once the tide was out. Lin pointed out that the tide had receded in the early morning before. If they needed to wait for 4.8 hours, they would have to wait until noon. She noted that it had already been a week and asked Chin when he thought the rescue team would arrive. She mentioned that she had read some records suggesting various possibilities about rescue timing. He thought that Lin was finally addressing the issue, and it felt like she was a dam with water levels exceeding a dangerous point, ready to break. Lin mentioned that after 2 years from an accident, missing persons would be declared dead. Chin thought that, like the dam being open to discharge floodwaters, there was no need to worry about the risk of collapse. He advised her not to overthink it, and pointed out that if the rescue team didn't arrive within a month, their efforts would weaken or they might give up entirely. Lin asked if he couldn't expect anything positive. Chin replied that it didn't matter. If things got worse, they would need to spend more time building a boat and escaping on their own. He then got up and asked why she was staring at him. With the tide having come in, he suggested they collect some seafood. Lin responded that she wasn't looking at him. After gathering seafood, they returned to camp and found that the hares had not escaped. Qian noted that their teeth were very sharp and speculated that if they had been larger hares, they might have managed to escape. He asked Lin to keep an eye on them to ensure they didn't get away. Afterward, they cooked the seafood. Lin told Chin that the food was ready and invited him to join her. He replied that he would eat later and mentioned he needed to collect the leftover shells first, asking her not to throw them away. When Lin questioned whether the shells were useful, Chin admitted he wasn't sure but thought they might come in handy. He considered that the seafood they had collected would last them for 2 days. Fortunately, the tide's ebbing times for the next few days would be from noon to afternoon, giving them a chance to gather even more food. It was a stroke of luck that neither of them was allergic to seafood, but he knew relying solely on the sea for food was only a temporary solution. He needed to find other food sources during this time. Lin noticed that Chin had dark circles under his eyes. Afterward, he went to sleep, asking her to wake him at midnight. She wondered if he hadn't slept all night because of her. The next morning, he woke up and asked why she hadn't woken him to change shifts. Lin explained that he had been in a deep sleep, and she hadn't wanted to disturb him, thinking he needed the rest. Sheen suggested she get a good rest, and that she didn't need to worry about anything else for now. He stepped outside the camp, thinking the tide would ebb around 1 p.m., and resolved to find additional resources before then. As he walked through the forest, Chin took a rest and reflected on how challenging it was to find resources. After nearly 2 hours of searching, he had only come across some unfamiliar wild fruits. Judging by the position of the sun, it was around 9 a.m., and he wondered how much longer it would take to reach the beach. He got up, concerned that he might miss the ebbing time. He suddenly heard a familiar sound and was surprised to find a very large bamboo forest nearby. He decided to cut down some bamboo, thinking that with this material, most of the items in his wildcraft collection could finally be practical. However, cutting the bamboo was difficult as it kept bouncing back. He hoped that such a large bamboo forest might also contain bamboo shoots, but since they still had enough food in the camp, there was no immediate need to collect them. It took him 2 hours to get to the bamboo forest from the camp, and he had spent a lot of time cutting the bamboo. It was almost noon by the time he finished. He regretted not finding the bamboo earlier, but took as much as he could carry and headed back to the camp. When Chin returned to the camp, he found Lin had roasted fish for him. She said she had prepared it in case he came back late and urged him to eat it before it got cold. He asked her to wait while he set down the bamboo. As he looked at the fish, he noticed it was overcooked and mentioned that it seemed too hot. Lin asked if something was wrong with it. Chin explained that it was overcooked and that he would eat it later. He didn't want to upset her, so despite the fish not looking great, he tried to be positive. As he ate, Lin asked how it was. He found it wasn't as good as he hoped, but told her it was fine. Lin took a bite and realized it was bitter from being burnt. She apologized for ruining the food. Chin reassured her that it was only slightly burnt and asked her not to worry about it too much. He suggested she could have the scallops if she didn't like the fish, but when she declined, he told her to forget about it and not to push herself too hard. Later that night, as Chin worked with the bamboo, Lin asked what he was doing. He replied that he was making a fish cage since the bottle wasn't sufficient to catch enough fish. Lin asked if she could help with anything. Chin explained that he needed to cut the bamboo into sections with a dagger and then split one end to wrap a rope around it, which could be used as a water bottle. Lin insisted on taking on the task herself, saying they needed to work together to survive on the island. Chin warned her to be careful and not cut herself. He noticed how much she had changed. She had been passive before, but now she was actively helping him. He felt hopeful about their future. Chin recalled the instructions for making the fish cage from a book and, upon completion, received 500 points from the system. With the fish cage ready, He looked forward to catching more fish. They were sitting by the bonfire when she showed him what she had made according to his instructions. He noted that the ears on the bamboo would be used for threading and expressed his surprise and appreciation for her work. She mentioned that they also needed holes, to which he replied that he would handle that. She then inquired about the plan for the next day. He explained that he needed to go back to the bamboo forest to collect more bamboo. She asked if she could accompany him and help out, as she wasn't sure what she could do alone. He admitted that he had been hesitant to assign her many tasks before due to her unstable emotions, but now that she had overcome them, he felt he could be more demanding. She wondered why he was giving her a stern look and regretted mentioning those things. They reached the bamboo area and she remarked on its vastness, saying it was so large she couldn't see the end of it. He admitted he had been shocked by its size as well. After talking for 2 hours, he suggested they take a break. She noted that it was dusk and proposed setting up camp there so they wouldn't have to worry about beasts. Chien said that food would still be an issue and that it wasn't the right time to move the camp. He handed her a dagger and instructed her to look for bamboo shoots, noting that it would take some time to return to camp whether she found the shoots or not, so she needed to be back before afternoon. She assured him not to worry, adding that even without his reminder, she wouldn't venture far, and since it was a large bamboo forest, there must be plenty of bamboo shoots. She began her search and quickly found a lot of bamboo shoots, choosing the smaller ones because the larger ones were too heavy. As she worked, she collected a substantial amount, which she thought would sustain them for a while. However, she soon heard a noise, and upon turning around, spotted wild boars. She tried to stay calm and decided to inform Chin, worried that their situation could become dire. She hurried back to him, and he noted how quickly she had returned. She told him she had seen wild boars. He asked if she was sure they were wild boars. She confirmed and pointed out that there were 8 boars moving in that direction. He grabbed her hand and urgently told her they needed to leave quickly. As they ran, he thought that even though the wild boars weren't carnivorous, their aggressive nature made it crucial for them to get away as soon as possible. They soon spotted boars ahead of them and realized that he hadn't expected any to be in that direction as well. Their path back to the camp was blocked. When they arrived in the morning, there had been no boars, but now there were many, and he wondered if they had all emerged from a cave. He instructed her to stay quiet and suggested they sneak away without making any noise. However, as they were moving, a boar spotted them and began charging toward them. Chin grabbed her hand and urged her to run. As all the other boars began to chase after them, Chin realized they were running so fast that they would easily catch up within 2 minutes if he didn't find a solution. Lin was exhausted from running and felt she couldn't continue. She feared she might die there. Releasing his hand, she told him she was a burden and asked him to leave her behind. Chin was shocked by her words and wondered if she saw their situation as some sort of movie. He questioned whether she believed he could survive alone and if she thought only one of them could make it. Lin urged him to hurry and go without her. Determined to protect them both, Chin decided to confront the boars instead of running. He took out his axe and howled loudly, trying to scare the boars. He knew that wild boars were particularly timid in groups, and that none of them wanted to be the first to attack or get hurt. If he could scare them enough, they might retreat. He howled again and made it appear as if he was preparing to attack. Then he threw his axe at the boars, causing them to back off. Lin, seeing the boars retreat, asked if Chin was okay. He agreed and told Lin that the wild boars had retreated, but they might come back. It wasn't the time for chatting. He needed to pick up the stone axe, and they had to return to camp immediately. He noticed that the axe wasn't broken, and then saw a boar standing there with a severe injury to its leg, and the blood flow wasn't stopping. He knew that if a boar was alone, it would be frightened and could become extremely aggressive, fighting even to the death. The injured boar charged at him, so he used his axe to defend himself. As he fought, he thought about luring the boar away so Lin could escape safely. He told Lin to get back to the camp and focused on drawing the boar's attention towards himself. He used his cheetah-like speed to run fast, realizing he hadn't anticipated how taxing the ability would be. He couldn't maintain the speed much longer. If he continued running, he might exhaust himself. He estimated that the experience card's effect could last for a day, but he could only sustain it for 3 minutes at most. With the help of the card, he aimed to get at least 100 meters away from the boar, hoping it would lose sight of him. He heard the sound again and realized it was the boar. Exhausted, he knew he couldn't run any further. Climbing a tree to hide, he hoped the boar wouldn't be able to spot him. He wondered if the boar could track him by scent, and soon enough, it seemed to have found him. He considered that the boar might have been chasing him for 2 kilometers. Despite its injury, it had persisted, possibly waiting for him to come down. At least the boar couldn't climb the tree, so he decided to take a break and plan his next move once he regained his strength. The boar began hitting the tree, and he thought that if it continued, the tree would fall in about half an hour. After a long rest, he had regained most of his strength and planned to use his talent to escape once the tree collapsed. When the boar finally stopped, Chin guessed it was because it was also exhausted. He saw the boar running away and estimated its weight to be around 100 kilograms. If he could kill it, the meat could provide them with bacon for at least a month. Seeing that it was weakened from its chase, he decided to seize the opportunity to kill it. He descended from the tree to challenge the boar, knowing that injured creatures can be incredibly dangerous. He needed to be cautious. As the boar charged at him, he maneuvered to the side, causing the boar to strike the tree and almost get killed in the process. Seeing that it was still moving, he wondered if it had survived. He quickly stabbed the dagger into the boar's head. The boar, in pain, pushed Chin back. Chin noted the boar's tough skin and thick flesh, and despite his efforts, the dagger struggled to penetrate its body. He continued stabbing the boar repeatedly until, finally, it succumbed. He received 2,000 points for the kill, and hoped that Lin would return to camp. He knew he needed to leave quickly to avoid attracting other beasts with the smell of blood. The boar was too heavy for him to carry back whole, so he decided to cut it into pieces. Realizing it was already late, he decided to hide the boar's body to prevent other beasts from finding it. He covered the dead boar with leaves, knowing that predators have a keen sense of smell and might be attracted to the blood. For now, this was the best he could do, and he hoped the carcass wouldn't be discovered. The scene shifts to Lin, who was busy making another axe and trying to work quickly. She tore some cloth and began putting ashes on it to create a makeshift cover. Chin arrived and asked why she was doing that. Lin explained that if she encountered a wild boar again, she planned to throw the ash bag at its face to blind it and make her escape. Chin asked if she was planning to return to the bamboo forest. Lin, startled by his sudden appearance, replied that she was actually looking for him. Realizing he had arrived, Chin noted how quickly she had returned and suggested she collect the fish, as he had brought a few himself. Lin asked if he was injured, and Chin reassured her that he was perfectly fine. Overcome with emotion, she hugged him and expressed her worry that he might have died. After releasing him, she noticed he was wet and asked if he had taken a bath. Chin removed his shirt and mentioned that it was a long story, but when he began to take off his jeans, he stopped and said he would explain later. Lin pointed out that he wasn't a naive high school student anymore and shouldn't feel shy. She urged him to change into dry clothes, as the temperature would drop at night and he might catch a cold. He thought it would be best for her to turn around. He removed his jeans while she kept her eyes closed, asking why he was doing this. He reassured her that he wasn't removing his undergarments. After changing, he put on a leaf and they both sat near the bonfire to have dinner. Lin mentioned that there were many bamboo shoots in the forest, but the wild boars had taken over. She was relieved that the fish caught in the fighting cage was sufficient for them for the day, and suggested they should avoid the bamboo forest in the future. Chin then revealed that he had killed a boar near the bamboo forest and had covered it up, intending to return the next day to bring back a lot of meat. He offered to take her with him if she didn't believe him. Lin understood that he was set on returning to the bamboo forest and expressed concern about the danger. Chin replied that he was fortunate to have killed the wild boar and, given the current situation, he didn't need to take unnecessary risks. He then asked her how he should explain the situation and began telling her a story. He spoke of a mother and her son who lived near the sea. The mother, who had lost her husband to drowning, wouldn't allow her son to enter the sea, fearing the same fate for him. However, the son went to the sea in secret. One day, a tsunami struck and drowned the entire village. Lin continued the story, explaining that the boy saved his mother because he had learned to swim. The boy realized that avoiding problems wouldn't solve them, so he had taken the initiative to learn how to swim. Lin remembered reading a similar article in an English exam paper during junior or senior high school. She asked Chin if he had learned from that story and decided to take action instead of waiting for disaster. Chin agreed and explained that he planned to deal with the boars by making a bow and arrows. He knew there were many other threats on the island besides the wild boars, and with bamboo bows, he could protect himself in various situations. The next morning, Chin informed Lin that he hadn't gone to collect the fish. That task would be hers. He asked her not to burn the fish again, and Lin assured him she wouldn't. Chin left in a hurry, thinking about the talent experience card he had used. It would expire after noon that day, and since he had used it the previous day at noon, it would disappear by that afternoon. He hoped to bring back the meat before the card expired, as he planned to leave if more boars appeared. When he arrived, he found that other beasts had discovered the boar, but fortunately, they hadn't eaten much. The 4 legs with meat were still intact, and the boar's fur, though somewhat tough, could be used to make a blanket or cushion. The injury was so severe that he could see the bones, and he wondered what kind of beast could inflict such a terrible wound on a rough boar. He hoped he would never encounter such a creature. The forelegs weighed several dozen kilograms, providing enough food supplies for a month if they managed the meat carefully. He used his dagger to cut the meat, noting that the tendons were strong enough to make bowstrings. After gathering as much as he could carry, he thought that if he hadn't been afraid of encountering the wild boar again, he would have brought Lin along to retrieve even more. He resolved to make the most of his remaining time with the talent experience card before it expired. Lin was sharpening a small stick when Chin approached her with a cake, trying to scare her by asking if she would use the bones of the boar to make bone needles. She pointed the stick at him and asked if he was trying to scare her to death and inherit her credit cards. Then she noticed 4 large boar hooves and guessed they would last them for a week. He suggested they might last for 2 weeks since the boar wouldn't eat much. He thought they were quite heavy, and mentioned that his shoulders were sore from carrying them for such a long distance. Lin inquired about the white meat, noting it looked quite greasy. He asked if she didn't know about pig fat. When she admitted she didn't, he explained that it was used to make lard. She replied that they didn't have any, to which he responded that they could make some. He then asked if she wanted to play with mud, and offered to show her how to make pottery from clay, instructing her to watch carefully. He spread out some soil, and after sitting on it with leaves, he explained that they needed to build a base with clay before making pottery. He then reminded her of the process, explaining that the thickness and size of the objects required them to make clay strips of uniform size. He noted that among the methods, the last 3 were impractical because they required molds and machines. He said they would wrap the strips around the base one by one, at least giving it a shape. He demonstrated the technique and, when Lin asked what it was, Chin threw the example away, explaining that the clay was very soft. He cautioned her to be careful when shaping the item, as mishandling could result in strange shapes like his. He then taught her the method and encouraged her to give it a try. Lin agreed, and Chin made a bowl, noting that it wasn't too difficult. He asked her what she was making and assured her that failing the first time was normal. He encouraged her to keep trying despite the initial difficulty. Lin showed him what she had made, but she was not satisfied with the results. Chin, seeing her work, was impressed and told her not to set her standards too high. He mentioned that he wasn't making bowls himself and suggested she try making a cooking pot instead. He also offered to build a kiln for her. He thought that everyone had their own strengths and decided that, in the future, he would leave such craft work to her. She asked what size he wanted, and he replied that another family-sized pot would be ideal, as it would be easier to fire if it was not too big. He emphasized that it was important to ensure the clay pottery was dry to prevent cracks during the firing process. Although the clay could be fired directly in a fire for better quality, he planned to use a kiln to make the pottery hard. He then needed to make a bucket-shaped form from clay. As evening approached, he decided to finish the remaining work the next day. They had dinner together, and he felt content, noting that the fishing cage had provided enough fish, and there was plenty of boar meat in reserve. He felt as though he was a wealthy man, and contemplated ways to improve their quality of life. When Lin asked why he was laughing so happily, he was surprised, and asked if he was really laughing. After she confirmed, he explained that it was because they were still alive. He also mentioned that few girls nowadays knew how to sew, and she had done an excellent job. She replied that they didn't have any other choice because they had no other clothes, and their current clothes would wear out sooner or later. No matter how skilled she became at sewing, it would be futile if they didn't have adequate clothing. He assured her that they wouldn't be without clothes forever, and reassured her not to worry, promising that they would get new clothes someday. He thought that with their current system, he would be able to cultivate a civilization on the deserted island and eventually find a way to leave. They were both using bamboo branches and charcoal as brushes and paste. Lin asked if this was correct. He explained that charcoal would absorb many substances, and when ground into powder, it could even be used to clean their teeth to some extent, though it wasn't a substitute for real toothpaste. He recommended using it every 2 days and asked how it felt. She replied that it was hard on her teeth but didn't cause any pain. Lin then asked how long the firing process would take. He responded that rough pottery like theirs usually took about 5 hours to fire. When she asked if they needed to wait until the afternoon, he realized he had forgotten to mention one thing: if the firing process was successful, the pottery needed to be left to cool overnight before it could be used. She asked what that meant. He explained it to her and showed her the place where they could watch the process. He also thought it would be easy for her to handle. Lin replied that she would take care of it. At noon, he found that only 1 out of 3 pieces had succeeded, and the success rate was too low. He decided to look for a different solution. Lin noticed some powder and asked about it. He explained that it was a material used in ceramics called chamote and provided details about it. The scene shifts to midnight, where he wakes up and asks her to take over the shift. She replies that she will finish the jar. He checked their work and noted that although 2 pieces were broken, half of them were successfully finished, suggesting that Shamote made a difference. He thought that if he could gradually determine the right firing time and control the temperature throughout the process, the success rate would improve. Based on the current loss rate, after a certain number of clay pieces were fired, they would have enough usable pottery for daily needs. The next morning, as they began preparing food, he noticed that the weather was rainy, but he hoped it wouldn't actually rain. Lin asked if she should start boiling lard. He replied that adding water could increase the oil yield and prevent the oil from burning. To minimize splashing when the water meets the hot oil, she should add only a small amount of water. As the oil heats up, the water will evaporate, so she didn't need to worry about it. It would take a while before the oil started to come out, as they first needed to grind the shells into powder. Lin asked why they needed to grind the shells. He explained that he wanted to make soap. Surprised, Lin asked what would happen if soda mixed with grease. He explained that saponification would occur, and she realized what he was referring to. As he began the process, he noticed Lin using a leaf as a fan to blow air at him. She mentioned that burning calcium carbonate produces carbon dioxide, which could make him dizzy if inhaled in large amounts. He reassured her that it wasn't a big deal and reminded her to avoid taking the ash water from the bottom, only using the clean part from the upper layer. With this process in mind, he proceeded to make the lard. Lin then asked about the floating substance that smelled so good, and if it was edible. He replied that it was lard dregs, which were edible but advised her not to eat too much as it was quite greasy. He mentioned that it was a good dish for those who enjoyed lard dregs. Lin inquired how long it would take for the soap to become solid. He told her it would be ready by the next morning, not on the same day. He then suggested they go to the plantain field to gather some leaves, reminding her to take precautions in case it started raining. He noticed that the dark clouds were thickening, and it looked like a heavy rainfall was imminent. He thought about how he had built the wooden shed in advance. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known where to seek shelter from the rain. He mentioned that he currently had a total of 6,000 points, and that purchasing a talent required at least 5,000 points. He wondered how many points he would earn after finishing making bamboo bows. Lin arrived and asked what he was thinking about. He replied that he was concerned she might have been bitten by a snake, given how long she had taken to bathe. He then asked if the soap was good. She confirmed it was, noting that it produced a lot of bubbles. However, she mentioned that if used to wash her hair, it made her hair a bit dry, but she was pleased to have soap on such a deserted island. He then handed her a comb, and she thanked him. He told her that taking care of the boar skin wasn't too difficult. He instructed her to use the dagger to remove the oil film and meat scraps to prevent the skin from rotting and smelling. She agreed, and went to handle that task. He thought that dried bamboo was the best material for making bows. The bamboo had been stored in the shade for 2 years, which reduced its moisture content and made it less prone to deformation. He wondered how he had found such quality bamboo and noted that drying it with fire was the only method he could use. While cutting the bamboo, he recalled the different types available and the process of making a bow, as well as which types were best suited for it. As he began shaping the bamboo into a bow, he heard the rumble of thunder. He asked Lin to store the boar legs, tendons, and soap in jars to prevent them from getting wet and molding. The rain started, and they both moved inside. While eating, Lin wondered how long the rain would last. He replied that it didn't seem likely to stop anytime soon. Lin then remarked that Chin seemed like a top student, as he appeared knowledgeable about soap making. He denied being a top student, explaining that he had received C and D grades in exams and only enjoyed reading extracurricular books. Lin responded that a person's knowledge shouldn't be judged solely by their grades, and that it was unfair to judge someone based on scores alone. She then asked if her parents placed importance on her grades. As he was sleeping, he heard a rumbling sound and woke Lin up. She saw Chin holding the leaves of their shelter, and he told her he would explain later, but needed her help to stake them down. They both went outside, and she asked why he was doing this, as she didn't feel like they were in any danger. He helped her climb a tree and joined her there. She was scared by the rumbling sounds as well. They observed deer and hares fleeing the area. Lin mentioned that she had thought a dangerous beast might be approaching. Chin confirmed that something was coming, and soon a group of wild boars arrived, destroying their belongings. Chin covered her mouth to keep her quiet. He estimated there were almost 20 wild boars. After the boars left, they discovered 2 that hadn't managed to escape. He reassured Lin not to be scared, noting that it was good the boars hadn't picked up their scent yet. Lin asked if the 2 boars were dead. Chin checked and saw that they were still breathing. He wasn't sure if they were pretending to be dead or if they were truly injured. Although he could have killed them to prevent them from suffering further, he didn't want to take the risk at that moment. He wondered what had happened to them and noticed that their wounds looked as if they had been struck by a thick whip. He realized their body temperature was being steadily drained by the rain and that they had nearly reached their limits. If they continued in these conditions, they would freeze to death. He still didn't know if the boars would ever leave, and he was not prepared to stay outside any longer. He quickly came up with a solution. He decided he would throw one of his shoes to distract the boars, hoping this would give them a chance to escape. If this plan failed, he would have to fight them off. As he threw the shoe, the boars charged toward it. He noticed that the boars seemed startled by the sound, suggesting they were frightened by something, which was likely why they had attacked him. He crouched down and told her to jump so he could catch her. Her leg slipped, and she fell onto him. She then asked if he was hurt. The next day the rain stopped, and Chin was surprised to find he had earned 3,000 points for surviving the heavy rain. Tenny began to pack up the camp and mentioned that it was fortunate he had dismantled the wooden hedge. Otherwise, the boars might have destroyed it. He replied that some frames were still broken, and they would need to find time to replace them. But for now, they would have to make do. Then Lin saw the hares and was relieved that they were okay. If the hares had fled, they would have missed the chance to eat them. Chin asked her not to speak of such grim things while smiling. She responded that it was a shame the soap had been damaged before they could use it more. He noted that it was fortunate the soap hadn't gotten completely wet, and since it was still in pieces, Tenny would put it to use later. He worried that all the items they had stored in the camp would become wet, and he hoped they would dry out in the sun as soon as possible. After all that, she wore a leaf to cover herself. He asked her to give him her undergarments so they could save soap by washing all their clothes together. She refused. He then reached the river and found it had risen due to the rain. The trap he had set had already been carried down the river, but fortunately, the cage was still there. He also wore a leaf to wash the clothes, and considered that if things continued like this, Tenny would soon be without clothes. Therefore, they needed to find some plants from the Urtakashi family. At night, they both had dinner, and Lin was anxious about the possibility of the boars returning. Shin reassured her that the noise the boars made while running was so loud that Tenny would likely have enough time to escape before the boars arrived. He also mentioned that their clothes were still not dry and suggested that Lin go to sleep while he kept watch. She agreed and asked him to wake her up at midnight. Chin knew that Lin was unsettled by the events of the previous night, and he shared her unease. He felt that the boars might come back, which made him nervous and unable to relax. After finishing some pottery, he realized that he had underestimated the challenges posed by nature. He reviewed his methods and processes, then crafted a bow. Following that, he sharpened a stone tip and attached it to a stick to complete the bow. He earned 2,000 points for making it. He discovered that he now had 11,000 points and decided it was time to do some shopping. He considered the options: the swift cheetah, the beast, or the talent of the ox. After some thought, he chose the swift cheetah. He immediately felt his body becoming much tougher and experienced a refreshing sensation, as if the fatigue had vanished after a long sleep. The next day, he asked Lin to throw the clay blocks and find a place to stack the pottery pieces. She agreed. He reflected on how the rampaging wild boars had thrown their camp into chaos. After a night's rest, they both regained their strength and began cleaning up the mess left by the rain. Since most of their pottery had been destroyed by the boars, they needed to make new pieces. They had done this before and had improved significantly. They spent almost 2 days creating a lot of pottery for daily use. On the third day, Chin started practicing with the bamboo bows. The system's assistance was limited to basic instruction on aiming a bow. Initially, he was a poor shooter, but after many attempts, he improved, though he was still not very proficient. The next morning, he noticed that mud had stuck to his shoes and wondered if it was because the dense forest blocked the sunlight. Despite 3 days having passed since the rain, the land was still very muddy. He saw something moving inside the flyer and wondered if they were pollywogs. He questioned why they would be there, and if they had hatched on their own, rather than being brought by external forces. He then made his way to the bamboo forest, thinking he would avoid the boars if he stayed on the edges. While cutting bamboo, he heard a sound and thought it might be pheasants. He soon spotted them and was struck by their beauty. He decided to have pheasant soup for dinner and attempted to shoot one with his bow, but the arrow missed. He realized that shooting a living creature was more challenging than hitting a stationary target. The pheasants, being slow-witted and not frightened by his arrows, remained in place. He decided to try again, but many of his shots missed. He thought getting closer might help. Eventually, he managed to hit one pheasant and earned 200 points. He shot 2 more pheasants but found that his arrows were nearly depleted. Nonetheless, 3 pheasants were enough for several meals. As he gathered the birds, the remaining pheasants realized what was happening and fled. At night, he prepared the soup, and when he opened the pot, the aroma was delightful. Lin took a sip and commented that it was fresh and refreshing, expressing her appreciation. He considered the fact that there wasn't much meat in the soup and suggested that it would taste even better with some salt. She agreed and lamented the absence of salt on their deserted island. She wished they had it, not only to enhance the flavor, but also because it provided essential micronutrients. He realized he had overlooked the idea of making salt from seawater, and now that she wanted it so badly, it was clear that they could indeed produce it. He proposed they go to the beach the next day to start making salt. He noted that they hadn't consumed salt in the past 2 weeks and lacked sufficient sodium in their diet. It was time to address this issue. She agreed with the plan. Then Tenny and Chin went to the beach. She guessed that boiling the pot of seawater to make salt would take a while, so she suggested they search for resources while they waited. He agreed, noting that walking around was beneficial even if they didn't find anything. She asked him what he planned to do. He replied that he would make a sundial to tell time, which would help them create better schedules in the future. She thought it was a good idea and decided to join him. While working on the sundial, she pointed out that they lacked professional tools and it would be challenging to achieve an accurate angle. He mentioned that he had ropes. She inquired about his plan for the ropes. He explained that he would use them to measure and roughly cut a piece of wood with his dagger. He carefully described the entire process to her as they worked. By the end, they successfully created the sundial. He noted that although it was different from conventional clocks, a sundial still demonstrated 24 hours. They needed to mark 24-hour lines and label the numbers in order on both sides, with those on the back written counterclockwise. She asked if this was because the sun moved back and forth between the tropics. He agreed and explained how the sundial would be marked. He explained that the base of the sundial needed to be adjusted according to the latitude of the location to ensure accurate timekeeping. But they didn't know the island's latitude. She asked if he was planning to make a sextant. He replied that a sextant could measure latitude and longitude by determining the angle between the sun and the horizon at a given time. However, since he didn't know the current time, it wasn't necessary. At the very least, they could use the sundial to determine a specific time of day. She inquired if he meant noon. He agreed, explaining that shadows were shortest at noon. By adjusting the dial so that the shadow fell on the number 12, they could set the angle of the base correctly. He then asked her to keep watch over the sundial while he checked the seawater. She agreed, and said she would call him when the end of the shadow approached the bottom of the bamboo gnomon. When Chin checked the seawater, he found that it was still moist, and was concerned that the salt might burn if boiling continued too long. He decided to expose it to the sun for a while. From the pot of seawater they had about 200 grams of crude salt, which would be enough for 2 weeks. He then checked the sundial and noticed it was still unstable. He asked Lin to give him another bamboo pipe. Then they attempted to refine the crude salt, as it was not edible. Even after going through the refining process, they failed to achieve a satisfactory result. By 6 p.m., they returned to camp. Lin had the pheasant soup and remarked that it was amazing. He revealed that the specialty of Chinese cuisine had a lot to do with salt, sauce, and color. However, fire control was also crucial, and among the 3 factors, salt was the most important. This highlighted how salt could make a significant difference. While it might seem like an exaggeration, a little bit of salt could indeed make the soup delicious, though Lin may have been overreacting. She asked how many days had passed. He replied that it had been 22 days. She noted that it was nearly a month and recalled that he had previously mentioned building a boat. She asked what kind of boat he wanted to make. He replied that it should be a fishing boat or something better. However, before that could happen, they needed to improve their quality of life. He thought that given their current state, they would need a year to build a boat. To achieve this goal, they needed to survive and live comfortably so they would have the energy to focus on other projects. Then Lin suggested changing their wooden shed to something sturdier. They could build either a bamboo house or a wooden house. By doing this, they would avoid having to flee in panic if they encountered beasts again. He agreed and mentioned that they also needed to move their camp. He thought that since the rainy days, the wooden shed had never been a safe place for them to sleep, and they needed to find a better solution. When she asked why they needed to move, he explained that while the area was spacious, the dense surrounding forest provided convenient conditions for beasts. They had set up the temporary base because they had no other options, but now that their food shortage was resolved, they had the time to create a more suitable living space. The scene shifts 4 days later. He had been traveling, finding it challenging to locate a suitable place for the new base. Over the past 4 days, he had not found any good locations. Then he saw a brighter area and wondered if he had reached the edge of the forest. He pondered what he would encounter once he emerged. As he came out, he discovered an open area and a cave as well. Since he wasn't sure if there were any beasts in the cave, he needed a way to check for them. Unable to see inside clearly, he decided to shoot an arrow to test the situation. The arrow made a normal sound as it hit the rock, and he realized the cave was unoccupied and quite spacious. He entered and discovered the bones of a ferocious beast. Suddenly, a beast attacked him, but he used his agility to dodge the attack and wondered if it was a panda, their national treasure. He moved quickly and was puzzled by how unusual the panda seemed. To investigate further, he threw a small piece of bamboo towards it. To his surprise, the panda took the bamboo and broke it with its mouth. He sensed something was off because, although the creature had a black and white head like a panda, its head was completely white, different from the typical pandas, which have a mostly white head with black markings. He speculated that this might be a subspecies of panda. He knew he was no match for the creature in a direct fight, so he had to stay away from it. Climbing a tree, he watched as the panda looked around. Chin thought he wasn't far from it, but the panda didn't seem to find him, indicating that its sense of smell wasn't very sharp. He decided to attack the panda with an arrow, but it had no effect. The panda soon pinpointed his location and glared at him angrily. Chin started running, with the panda in hot pursuit. He maneuvered through the trees and used a stone-headed arrow to attack, but he didn't expect the panda's head to be particularly tough. The stone hit the panda's head but shattered on impact. The panda lunged at him, and he jumped to dodge, realizing how dangerous the panda's powerful paws were. He could easily be cut in two. Exhausted, Chin managed to escape and return to camp that night. He told Lin everything that had happened. She advised him to give up on confronting the panda and suggested she could search for another location. Chin agreed, explaining that shooting arrows had proven ineffective and that the situation was too dangerous. He also mentioned that the creature might not be a true national treasure, as it looked quite different from a typical panda. He assured her that if he couldn't defeat it, he would run rather than risk his life. Lin asked if he had found any solution. Chin replied that the buckle on his belt was made of iron, so he planned to melt it down to make arrowheads. Lin pointed out that this would only yield 2 arrows. Chin then proposed tying the arrows with ropes so he could pull them back. With his knowledge, he remembered the steps necessary to melt iron, and, together, they managed to create the necessary equipment. As Chin broke the belt buckle, Lin remarked that if they continued with this approach, Chin would soon be left naked. He reassured her that it wouldn't be a problem as long as she didn't feel embarrassed. They built a fire by pulling and releasing the rope. Lin asked how long it would take, and Chin estimated it would take about half an hour. Lin struggled but continued working without stopping. Eventually, they succeeded, and Lin collapsed, exhausted and in need of rest. Chin admired the mold Lin had created, noting how exquisite it was. She had engraved 2 perfectly symmetrical molds with just a dagger. He believed that with her help, he could create even more intricate objects in the future. Finally, he placed the arrowheads in water for sharpening, and he also gained 500 points for his efforts. Lin then asked about the arrowheads. Sheen thanked her for her craftsmanship and mentioned that he would make dinner that night since she had worked so hard. After dinner, Lin went to sleep, and Chin wondered if he could capture the open space, depending on the effectiveness of the arrowheads. He sharpened them extensively and thought that if he had more iron, he could make dozens of arrows and potentially deal with the panda in a single day. His recent points from the sundial and sea salt added up to 4,700, which wasn't enough to buy a book he wanted. He was particularly interested in the wild animals collection. When he checked the screen, it indicated that the beast training, collecting, and wild animals collections were combined effectively, allowing him to buy both for 4,500 points. If he chose to buy the wild animals collection separately, it would cost less. Curious about the benefits, he decided to make the purchase. Afterward, he reviewed the wild animals collection and discovered it complemented the common animals. He was eager to see what new skills were included in the beast training collection. The screen indicated that he would learn how to handle all kinds of animals using tricks. After that, he looked up methods for dealing with kangaroos, hippopotamuses, and gorillas. He became frustrated with the book's author, feeling it was a waste of money and that the bargain had proven unreliable in terms of quantity. He then prepared the food and found that Lin had woken up. As they ate the soup, she asked if the panda was fierce. Chin asked if she wanted to see it, and then suggested they forget about it. Lin insisted on seeing it. Chin thought that while he could escape from the panda on his own, it would be impossible to do so with Lin. Lin took a sip of the soup and complimented Chin on his cooking skills. Chin reflected that although Lin had been scared and uneasy at first, she now seemed calm and relaxed, adapting well to their life there. He then returned to the cave, noting that he had 2 iron arrowheads and didn't want to waste them, even though they were tied with ropes. He aimed at the cave, deciding to go all out with the charcoal arrow. He took a deep breath and shot into the cave. He wondered if the panda might not be in the cave and had gone out in search of food. He climbed a tree and considered whether the wolf animals collection he had bought the previous night contained any information about the panda. He had only seen that it was a primal panda and had read its description. He learned that the primal panda was a prehistoric creature from the late Miocene, about 8 million years ago. The description indicated that it could be tamed in a month or two, though he found the system's knowledge to be sometimes flawed. The idea of taming a prehistoric creature as a helper was tempting, but he needed to figure out a way to incapacitate the panda first. He considered various methods, like sliding to hit its vital spots, but eventually decided to use an arrow. He shot the arrow, hoping it would make the panda unable to walk so he could hunt later. The arrow struck the panda, and Chin pulled it back. However, he soon realized that he had only managed to irritate the panda. His cheetah skill activated, allowing him to quickly create a good distance between himself and the panda. He shot another arrow and retrieved it. Hiding behind a tree, he believed his tactics were working, though he knew that such intense activity required a lot of energy. He observed the panda from his hiding spot and noted that it had 6 wounds on its body. If he continued shooting over the next few days, he thought, the panda would eventually be incapacitated. As it was a prehistoric creature, he was prepared to take his time with it. On the next day, he shot at the panda again. He repeated this process on the 3rd day. However, on the 4th day, he noticed something strange. The panda was not resting in its usual spot in the cave at that time. He wondered if it had bled out, but the blood was still fresh. Suddenly, the panda appeared behind him and attacked. Chin used his cheetah speed to dodge the attack and shot another arrow at the panda. However, the panda caught the arrow and broke it, showing that it had become smarter since their previous encounters. Realizing the situation had changed, Chin decided it was time to retreat. As he left the area, it started to rain. He used a large leaf as an umbrella and thought about the situation. He had only 1 iron arrow left, and if the panda ruined that one, he wouldn't have any more to use. He needed to decide on the best course of action. While contemplating his options, he noticed a blue front and read its description. He realized that there was always a way forward, no matter the challenges he faced. He wondered if he could lay eggs on the bromeliads, and if the polywogs he had found in the plants that day were actually from poison dart frogs. He decided to test this by striking a small blue frog, recalling that the Wild Crafts collection had mentioned Indian poison darts. These arrows were known to kill large animals, and the toxin used came from poison dart frogs. Holding the arrow tip, he felt he now had a way to deal with the panda. He resolved to find more poison dart frogs. He then decided to return to camp since Lin was alone and the rain was heavy. When he arrived, Lin greeted him with a hug, expressing her happiness at his return. He sensed that the previous encounter had cast a shadow over her life, so he reassured her not to be scared anymore, as he was fine. Lin said she was only worried about him, not scared. She then noticed the frog on the tip of his arrow and asked if it was poisonous. He confirmed that it was poisonous, explaining that the brighter the color of the frog, the more toxic it was. Lin compared it to poisonous mushrooms and asked why he had brought it to camp. He covered the frog with leaves since it was already dead, and told Lin that he planned to use it to tame the panda. The next morning, they started heating the frog. Lin wondered if it was safe to do so. Chin confidently replied that it would be fine, as he had already extracted the toxin from it. Lin noticed that the frog was blistering and asked about it. Chin explained that it was the moisture from the frog's skin, not the toxin, and that they needed to wait a bit longer. Lin observed that the frog had turned black and was giving off a strange smell. Chin explained that the smell was due to the toxin seeping through the skin of the dark poison frog. He believed that the amount of toxin should be sufficient for a prehistoric panda. Given the panda's numerous injuries, he noted that too much toxin could potentially kill it. Lin then mentioned that she had prepared the items he had requested. Chin thanked her and noticed that the items were small balls, wet on the inside and dry on the outside. Lin asked what they were for, and Chin explained that he had a clever idea on how to use them. He approached the cave and examined the panda's footprints. He noted that there were no visible puddles on the grass, and the tracks led directly to the cave, indicating the panda was likely inside. He felt confident in his preparations and was ready for the confrontation. He threw the bomb-like device into the cave and waited. After a while, the panda emerged, and Chin realized that the arrows had failed to affect its limbs. However, he was well prepared this time. Chin began running, thinking that the panda had already lost a significant amount of blood and had inhaled some of the carbon dioxide from the device. He decided to make use of the panda's weakened state. He hid behind a tree while the panda searched for him. He noticed that, after running for a while, the panda was not howling as loudly as before. He attacked the panda with a poisonous arrow, thinking that a stone arrow wasn't as sharp as an iron one. He reasoned that if too much toxin entered its body, the panda would die. However, when the panda attacked him, he wondered if the arrow had worked. He used another arrow, but the panda shook its body vigorously to remove the poison. Chin thought that the panda might be struggling to breathe and controlling its muscles. He wondered if he hadn't injected enough toxin into the arrows, or if the stone arrows were too blunt to penetrate deeply. He shot another arrow, and the panda charged at him. Chin regretted not using an iron arrowhead from the start. Eventually the panda collapsed, and Chin hoped his strategy had worked. It seemed the panda's attempt to spring at him was its last effort, suggesting it was struggling with the poison. Chin decided to observe the panda. After 3 hours, the panda began to move again, but the amount of toxin had rendered it nearly incapable of moving without endangering its life. The next morning, as he was leaving the camp, Lin asked if the plan had really worked, and requested that he prepare more poison. He replied that it was sufficient, and that he would return that day if everything went well. He thought that both the fish and the bamboo shoots would be effective. Upon reaching the cave, he saw that the panda had fallen asleep at the entrance. The panda should have crawled further into the cave, and he wondered what was happening with its exposed rear. He then stuffed the bamboo shoots into the fish and threw it toward the panda. Noticing that the panda was still howling, he realized that the toxin was still affecting it and that it would have pounced on him otherwise. However, when the panda saw the fish, it started eating immediately. Chin thought that, even though the panda didn't seem very intelligent, it would be a great help to him for surviving on the island once tamed. He gave the panda more fish, noting that it was very hungry and hadn't moved from its spot. He considered giving it a name but was shocked to see that the panda had forgotten it had been poisoned. Deciding to name it Silly, he felt the panda's recovery was a positive sign. At dinner that night, Chin told Lin that from their current location, it would take him at least 2 months to fully tame Silly. Lin asked what Silly meant. Chin explained that it was the name he had given to the panda. Lin thought the name was odd and didn't know how to respond. Chin continued, saying that once Silly was no longer so aggressive, he should be able to complete the taming process. He noticed Lin setting her bowl aside and asked what was wrong. She replied that she didn't have much of an appetite. He then asked if she had started her period. She denied it and told him to stop making such remarks. He apologized for the question. Lin seemed a bit agitated, possibly because of his assumptions about her or due to her own concerns. Chin, aware that he didn't have much experience with such matters, and noting the lack of privacy on the island, found the situation a bit awkward. He then asked when her period might start. Lin said she didn't know. She explained the cycle length and mentioned that she wasn't experiencing any symptoms at the moment, possibly due to irregular schedules, but she wasn't sure how long the delay had been. He said he would start making paper the next day and wasn't sure if he could finish before she started her period. However, he noted that it wouldn't be as good as the paper they were accustomed to. Lin replied that it was fine as long as it was usable. Sheen then explained the types of paper they typically used and mentioned he would prepare the pulp using modern methods. The next morning, while Lin was still asleep, she smelled a strange odor and wondered what it was. Chin explained that it was the liquid excreted by humans. She asked if he drank it, and he clarified that it was used as a material in papermaking. Lin said she had never heard of making paper with urine. Sheen asked her to tie the bamboo strips into square frames while he worked on making water pipes. They were almost done with the preparations. Lin inquired if they had enough materials. Chin agreed and explained that sodium hydroxide solution, used in modern papermaking technologies, could separate lignin and gum from plants, allowing them to obtain cellulose-based pulp. This method produced long fibers in the pulp, resulting in tensile paper that wouldn't break easily when writing. He explained that the main component of urine was urea. By letting the urine sit for a while and then boiling it, they could obtain ammonia gas. Lin, observing him, thought it was amazing that he could figure out a way to make the solution on such a deserted island. He asked her not to just stand there and to add some water. He noted the pungent smell and anticipated that the chemical reactions might soon begin. It was a shame they didn't have a glass test tube to see exactly what was happening. They continued with the process, but after a while, Lin grew tired. Sitting down, she commented on how complicated it was and wished they had electricity on the island so they could obtain sodium hydroxide directly from the salt water through electrolysis. Cheen suggested that they might be able to tie the dagger to a bamboo stick and place the pipe in the salt water, hoping for a lightning strike to help with the process. Lin, however, told him to attempt that himself, as she wasn't willing to take such risks. After some time, they both went to collect weeds near their camp to boil and use for making paper. They continued working on the paper-making process, and Chin then washed away the impurities in the river, leaving only the white precipitate behind. Next, he poured clean water into the jar containing the precipitates and mixed it to obtain the paper pulp. While making the paper, he instructed Lin not to place thick layers on the frames when hanging the pulp. A thin layer was sufficient. He touched one of the frames and found it was still warm, even though it was already 3:30 in the afternoon. The pulp was thin, so the paper on the frames had started to take shape and was somewhat wet. If everything went well, they would have their first batch of paper by nightfall. Chin earned 1,000 points for making the paper. At dinner, he observed that the paper was still slightly yellow because they didn't have any bleach. It was also a bit coarser and thicker than what they typically used, but its toughness was impressive. Despite rubbing it vigorously, it didn't tear, only shedding a bit of powder. He told her that the paper was done, and they wouldn't need to use branches anymore since they now had plenty of paper. Their discomfort would be relieved. Lin asked him not to use such words while eating, and he apologized for that. She then remarked that it was impressive he was able to make paper on a deserted island, though he didn't need to talk about things like reading more. He replied that he had nothing else to add. After 3 days, he went to collect fish and reflected on how they had been making paper at the camp for the past 3 days. He wondered how Silly was faring. When he reached the cave, he found Silly asleep. As soon as Silly saw him, it became aggressive, but it calmed down when it noticed the fish. Chin instructed Silly to eat all the fish. He thought that Silly might have been starving, as it hadn't eaten anything for 3 days. He anticipated that Silly might accept a mixture of 4-5 bamboo shoots and 1-5 fish. He tossed a fish toward Silly, asking it to catch it. When Silly ate the first fish, Chin threw another, but Silly didn't take it. Chin speculated that Silly's diet might have changed over the past 2 months based on its behavior. With that in mind, he left the cave and headed to the river to catch more fish. After 2 hours, he reached the river, remembering that the area was dark and damp. He wasn't sure if he would find any fish, as he hadn't been out searching for resources since he had been focused on taming Silly. As he explored, he came across wild ginger and recalled its properties. Back at the camp, Lin's stomachache was worsening. Chin returned and began making soup. He asked her if she always felt so terrible during her period, noting that the girls in his class didn't seem to suffer as much. Lin replied that it hadn't been painful before. He looked at her and inquired how she had managed the pain in the past. She explained that she used a heating pad or a hot water bag and drank brown sugar water with eggs. Chin apologized for not having any of those remedies but offered ginger water and hot water bottles as alternatives. He asked if she wanted to try them. Lin was surprised that he had found ginger and asked where he had obtained it. Chin explained that he had picked it up randomly on his way back. She was impressed, and as she drank the ginger water, she felt a comforting warmth. They continued their routine, and the scene shifts to a month and a half later, where Chin approached Silly with lunch. He mentioned that he had picked bamboo shoots in the forest that morning, and they were fresh and tasty. Silly took the bamboo shoots and ate them, and Chin asked if they were tasty, wondering if he had misled Silly. He reflected on how, within 2 months, an animal that once fed primarily on meat was now eating bamboo shoots. It was truly remarkable. Perhaps Silly was originally an omnivore, but due to errors in archaeological research, it was believed that primitive pandas only ate meat. However, pandas had incorporated bamboo shoots into their diet. Even though Silly had accepted the bamboo shoots, Chin wasn't ready to conclude that it had fully changed its eating habits. The system indicated that he would change the eating habits of the primal panda and tame it. Chin believed this meant Silly had genuinely altered its diet, and the system had rewarded him, affirming his progress. He received the reward and discovered that tamed pandas would not harm their master. He found this development amazing and then stamped it on. As he touched Silly, he wondered if the taming process was complete, and if he could now gauge Silly's condition. He patted Silly and told him that Chin would be his master from now on. Returning to the camp, he shared the news with Lin. She asked to see Silly, and he agreed to introduce her the next day. They took bamboo shoots with them, and as they walked, Lin mentioned that she only needed to throw the bamboo shoots toward Silly. Chin agreed but reminded her to call Silly by name before offering the food so that Silly would recognize her presence. When they arrived at the cave, Silly took up a position, and Lin appeared nervous. Chin reassured her, saying there was no need to worry because he was there with her. Lin called out to Silly and approached with the bamboo shoots. After feeding him, she found herself growing friendly with Silly and even lay down next to him. She remarked on how soft Silly's fur was and how comfortable it felt to lie on. Chin thought about how Silly's temperature and behavior had changed significantly with the new diet. Originally, Silly had been aggressive, but now, as a more passive and non-offensive panda, it seemed cute and approachable. Chin was pleased that Silly could now be touched freely, much like a typical panda. Teeny went to feel Silly's bamboo shoots, and then Lin began planting some plants. She then asked if they could tie the mouths and tails of the fish together with ropes to create a bow, wondering if this could be considered a form of fish craftsmanship. Chin agreed and explained that it would take about half a day to leave the camp for the grassland, where the fish could survive for up to 10 hours. He had assessed the situation and found that the distance between the grassland and the river was about a half-hour walk. Since the river was shallow in that area, he wasn't sure if there would be any fish there. Once they moved to the cave, they could keep the fish in jars, ensuring they had food even if they couldn't catch any fish with the fishing cage. He then told Silly it was time to get back to work. Lin noted that only part of the pottery was stored in the 4 bamboo crates and asked about the rest, wondering if they needed to return to fetch it. Chin replied that they should leave it behind. They couldn't take it all, and they would make new pottery as needed. Lin then used a stone to cook the food, and Chin agreed it was difficult to find a flat stone like that. As they left the camp, Lin expressed that she didn't want to leave so suddenly. Chin noted that this was the first place they had lived on the island. Lin took one last look back before continuing on their way. They reached the cave and set up their new camp, with Chin earning 3,000 points for establishing it. Lin asked him to look at the sky, and they saw the galaxy, a view she had only seen in photos before. The scenery was unique to the island. Chin, however, explained that such sights were common in his hometown after the sun went down. Lin asked if it was really true. He confirmed that it was, though it only happened when he was young. Nowadays, due to air quality, seeing the stars had become very difficult. Chin mentioned that he was going to sleep. Lin suggested that since Silly was around, they wouldn't need to stay up at night and could sleep together. Chin then asked if she wanted to be his girlfriend. Lin responded by saying not to overthink things and admitted she wasn't ready for that. As Chin came closer, he noted that only couples sleep together. Lin said it was just a slip of the tongue. Chin laughed, saying he was only kidding. He then reminded her not to forget to pack the rest of the smoked fish. Lin admitted she hadn't been paying attention. The next day, they both dug the ground for clay, as the pottery they had was insufficient for their daily needs. They needed to make another batch of pottery. Chin mounted Silly to head out and asked Lin to work on the pottery from the clay. They planned to furnish their camp in the coming days. Chin reached the river to set up the fish trap again. On the 3rd day, they collected bamboo, and while Silly was eating, Chin reminded him to finish the work first. On the 4th day, they baked the bamboo to make it bendable. Chin explained to Lin that by heating the bamboo, they could shape it as desired. He climbed a small ladder to work on the bamboo house, and Lin advised him to be careful. Chin replied that it wasn't high enough to be dangerous. Lin suggested applying a layer of mud to the walkway for better consolidation. Chin countered that this would cause the walkway to become damp when it rained, turning into mud and potentially permeating into the kitchen area. After a week, they were arranging the items inside the house. Lin was thrilled to finally have a proper kitchen. Chin agreed that it was all worth it, and promised to take her to explore and get acquainted with the new surroundings. Lin waded into the river with Silly and told Chin that the water was cool and comfortable. Chin reflected on how, when they first arrived on the island, they were unsure about what to eat and how to solve various problems, and they had gone through a lot of trouble. While in the river, Lin's leg struck a stone. Upon inspecting it, she wondered if it was a crystal. Chin asked what she meant and identified it as quartz. Lin recalled that quartz was used to make glass. Chin explained that while the crystal was a type of quartz, it was of high purity. For their purposes, they would refer to it as a pebble. She asked what they would do next. He replied that the upstream area was different, with dense trees lining the river. In contrast, the downstream course was wider with fewer trees. He spotted a street and suggested they look for resources there. They discovered an old find that had been there for over 100 years. She remembered that the Chinese honey locust could be used to wash clothes. He agreed, adding that its water could also serve as a shampoo when combined with coconut oil and ginger water. She wondered if it would dry her hair. He thought that there were many friends on the tree, so they might collect a lot of honey locust seeds. He mentioned that it would make her hair silky. She reflected on how she had been using lard soap to wash her hair, which, although cleaning, had left her hair dry with many split ends, detrimental to its condition. She thought having some shampoo would be a brilliant idea. When he asked if she wanted the shampoo, she declined, reasoning that the tree was too high and too sharp, so she didn't want to put Chin in danger. He mentioned that he planned to make shampoo for her, and since she had brought it up, he was determined to follow through. Using his powers, He jumped so high that Lin was shocked. Lin told him that she was already satisfied with washing her hair with the soap on the deserted land and didn't really need any shampoo, so she asked him to come down. He advised her not to overthink and explained that he was going up for the honey locust seeds and reminded her to collect the fruits with the bamboo baskets. Lin thought it was remarkable how high he was going for her. He found that the fruits were on higher branches, so he had to climb up. The branches were thick and luxuriant, making them easier to climb compared to the smooth coconut trees. As long as he was cautious, even if he slipped, he wouldn't fall directly to the ground because he was secured with ropes tied to the tree. He took out his axe and thought about how he had climbed trees a long time ago and felt a bit rusty. As he continued, he noticed some leaves, but was unsure if they were the right ones. After collecting the honey locust seeds, he came down, and Lin informed him that they had already gathered a lot. He mentioned that they would also use some of the seeds to make shampoo. She was happy about this and told him to proceed as he wished. He replied that he didn't really want to make the shampoo because it was quite troublesome. She approached him, urging him not to change his mind. He admitted that he had never considered whether they should make shampoo and promised to think about it carefully once they returned from the sugarcane field. They soon arrived at a very large sugarcane field. He thought he was right about the field, but found it odd that the surrounding land was vacant, as if the sugarcane had been grown by humans. Lin touched the sugarcane, commenting on its unusual color and wondering if it was edible. He told her not to touch it, but she did so anyway and ended up with a small cut on her finger. She remarked on how sharp the sugarcane was and advised him to be careful. He replied that he was aware and was using his axe to cut them. He examined one and found it to be very red, with a smooth surface. The frosting was almost gone, and the sugarcane felt surprisingly light. Lin tried to eat some of the sugarcane but found it too hard. Chin explained that this type of sugarcane was suitable for refining sugar, whereas the yellow and black varieties tasted better. As Lin continued to eat, she described the taste as both sweet and sour, and somewhat unpleasant. Chima noted that the sugarcane was out of season in April, and that its juice would be much more refreshing and sweeter when in season. Lin asked if he would take some back with them, and he agreed, saying they would make some brown sugar from it. They returned and separated the seeds from the honey locust pods. After finishing this task, he announced that it was time for breakfast. Lin told Gani that the seeds of the honey locust were delicious, and the pods were soft and smooth. They tasted better than any plain rice porridge she had eaten before. However, she didn't get many honey locust seeds, and they ended up cracking over half of them. Chin reassured her, saying not to worry. The Chinese honey locust season was from May to December, so new fruits might appear soon. Lin then asked how long they needed to soak the honey locust fruits. He replied that it generally takes 2 to 3 days. Since the honey locust fruits had been hanging on the tree for a long time, they planned to eat them the next day if everything went well. He asked her to prepare all the materials they would need for shampoo the next day. Lin mentioned that she would collect some coconuts on the beach the following day. After that, Chin squeezed juice from sugarcane and planned to cut it into smaller pieces. After working all morning, he finally finished squeezing the juice. However, before he could refine it into brown sugar, he needed to filter it. Lin then returned and showed him some mushrooms she had collected. He was surprised and she asked him to praise her, explaining that she had spent all her time picking them on her way back. He appreciated her effort, but upon examining the mushrooms, he discovered that some of them were poisonous. He informed her that the red ones were poisonous and should not be eaten. They were Amanita verna. He explained that, aside from the poisonous ones, they had enough edible mushrooms to eat. Lin seemed disappointed by this news. Chin asked Lin to help him pick some mint leaves after she had rested. He had gathered a large batch of fresh, green leaves. She inquired if they were needed for the shampoo. He denied it, explaining that the mint was intended for making toothpaste. She then joked about whether they would be brushing their teeth with mint. He went on to explain how the toothpaste was made. Lin then asked if she had finished with the honey locust. She replied that she had not, and noticed him adding ginger to the liquid. Chin explained that the gingerol in the ginger would help prevent hair loss, stimulate new hair growth, reduce scalp itchiness, and strengthen the hair roots. Now, he would boil the honey locust water while Lin scooped out some coconut meat to crush it. He reminded her that it would take about an hour and a half to boil the coconut milk until it produced oil, and during this time, he would be free to do other tasks. Lin came by and asked if the lid they had made the previous day was being used. He explained that they would place the mint leaves above the boiling water in the bamboo tube to distill the mint oil. The vapor would carry the mint oil, which would then condense in the tube and flow into a bottle. Lin mentioned that the smell was wonderful. He noted that they would also collect the oil to make an essential balm, although it might not be very effective. Lin asked about the ratio of honey locust water to coconut oil. He replied that it was a 1:1 ratio, and they needed to mix them together. The shampoo would be completed when the oil solidified the next day. He earned 800 points for making the shampoo and 500 points for the toothpaste. Lin asked why they needed to wait until the next day. He suggested they could take a bath in the river now, as the sun was almost down. Later, while they were sleeping, Chin heard a sound and, feeling alarmed, went to check. It turned out to be Lin, happily talking in her sleep about the shampoo. He realized she was speaking in her dreams. Lightning flashed outside, accompanied by heavy rain. The sound woke Lin, and she asked if it was raining. Chin inquired if the noise had disturbed her. Lin saw that it was indeed raining heavily. Silly, feeling agitated, was looking outside. Lin asked what was wrong and if Chin had a plan. As Chin touched Silly, he sensed an intense magical aura and realized that the wolf boars had returned. Lin asked what Chin intended to do. He replied that although he hadn't been there, he had a feeling they would come, and if they did, she should stay inside the cave for safety. Eventually, the boars arrived, and Silly rushed to attack one of them. However, the other boars turned on Silly, causing him to fall. Chin thought it was risky for Silly to charge at the wild boars so recklessly, and feared that Silly might be overwhelmed. It was fortunate that Silly had drawn all the boars' attention, keeping them from attacking Chin directly. Silly attacked another boar, but another one was about to charge him. Chin used his bow to shoot down that boar, hoping the poisoned arrows he had stored for a long time would still be effective. To tame Silly, he had used most of the poisoned arrows he had made, leaving only 4. He needed to ensure that each arrow hit its target. Chin successfully killed 3 of the boars with 3 precise shots. Now, only 1 boar remained, and it was staring directly at him. The boars charged at Chin, and he decided to distract them to ease the pressure on Silly. He led a few of the boars on a chase, thinking that they were now far enough away. It was time to shake them off, so he used his cheetah speed to run. After a while, he climbed a tree and saw that the boars hadn't found him yet. He hoped that the boars would not return, and wondered how Silly was faring. He decided to go back to check as soon as possible. Silly roared loudly, scaring the boars away. Chin arrived and told Silly to calm down, reassuring him that it was over. He remarked that Silly deserved to be compared to a giant panda. Despite being a vegetarian, he was still not to be trifled with. The next morning, Lin asked what Chin planned to do about Silly's injuries. He replied that Silly would be fine. After all, this wasn't the first time Silly had been injured. Lin inquired how he knew this. Chin explained that Silly's odd behavior last time had led him to predict the arrival of the wild boars. He had a sense that something was coming and had prepared accordingly. They both dragged the boars into their kitchen. Chin mentioned that handling boars was a habit of Silly's. Lin agreed, and noted that it had also been a rainy day when the boars rampaged previously. She recalled that it had been rainy during the time Chin had tamed Silly, and wondered why the wild boars hadn't rampaged then. She was confused about the connection between the wild boar's behavior and the rain. Chin admitted that he was pondering the same question. Lin speculated that they might have to deal with the remaining 4 wild boars until nightfall. Chin suggested they could handle it the next day, and expressed a desire to collect some bamboo shoots. Lin asked if he planned to give Silly a reward. Chin responded that Silly deserved a reward for his bravery, and that they needed to supplement his diet with vitamins, as eating meat all the time wasn't ideal. Chin went to the bamboo forest to collect bamboo shoots. He thought they were quite rare outside the forest, and after searching for a long time, managed to gather only a few. He considered this amount sufficient for a simple meal, and planned to venture deeper into the forest for more. As he walked, Chin felt something was off. The forest was unusually quiet, and even the birds weren't singing. He noticed the grass moving in a way that resembled a rolling motion, which seemed out of place as such a phenomenon didn't exist in the forest. He turned around, recalling from TV series that investigating strange occurrences like this often led to danger. He decided it was best to leave immediately. Then he heard a sound and, turning to investigate, was shocked to see a titanoboa, the largest snake, emerging. The sight of the giant snake startled him. He began running, thinking about the danger of encountering such formidable beasts, and wondering if he might come across a dinosaur the next day. Using his skill, he fled swiftly and considered how he might kill the snake, realizing he would need to enter its mouth to do so. The thought frightened him, and he continued running. He remembered that snakes could detect the direction of their prey by sensing their smell in the air with their tongues, and could even pinpoint the prey's exact location. Running seemed to be a good strategy. He saw a slope and slid down it, with the snake's head passing above him, unable to see him. He recalled that the poisoned arrows he had used up the night before wouldn't be effective against such a giant creature, especially since they hadn't worked on Silly. He considered using the method from his beast training collection. Theoretically, it might work, but he estimated the success rate was less than 1 in 1,000. It felt like a gamble with almost certain doom. He noticed the snake had picked up his scent and decided to fight back. As the snake advanced, Chin leaped, aiming to attack its heart, which was located about 3 feet from its head. He managed to get on the snake and stabbed it with his dagger, but found the snake still very active. He wondered if the dagger's short length was insufficient to cause significant harm. Riding on the snake, he hoped that even if it sensed him, it wouldn't be able to locate him. He planned to take a break and find another way to escape. An hour later, he remained on the snake, realizing that killing it with just a dagger seemed impossible. The snake had been searching for him based on smell for a long time, but failed and eventually turned around and left. Chin thought that it might have given up on him. Theoretically, if he didn't make too much noise while escaping, he might slip away undetected. However, he knew this was only theoretical, and he needed to be prepared if the snake saw him again. Suddenly he smelled something foul and saw a dunghill. He guessed that wild boars would defecate at fixed times in the center of their territory, but there were no boars around. He suspected they had sensed the snake and fled in advance. Just then, the snake's speed increased, and Chin saw a wolf boar running. The snake began to consume the boar, and taking advantage of the distraction, Chin made his escape. As he ran, he noticed the injuries on the boar, which he attributed to the snake. This, he thought, was likely why the boars had become enraged. The snake had wrapped the boar with its tail, leading Chin to believe the battle would conclude more quickly than he had anticipated. He slipped and fell, thinking he was now a mile away from the snake. He hoped this distance might be beyond the snake's search range, but he knew there could be other dangers at night. If he encountered other wild beasts, he might be in grave danger, so he decided to find a place to hide. He entered the bamboo forest and hoped to find something useful in the system. Unfortunately, the points he had were not enough to afford any new talents. He hoped for a favorable outcome from the lottery wheel, even considering that an experience card could be beneficial. He discovered that the prices on the wheel had changed, and the swift thoroughbred horse caught his attention, which might improve his stamina. He worried that a blank position on the wheel might waste his points. Nonetheless, he planned to use the horse and his swift cheetah skill to navigate out of the bamboo forest. He spun the wheel, but it stopped on the taming stamp. Frustrated, Chin wondered what he could do with that in his current situation. He feared that the wild boars would soon return, and he hoped they wouldn't spot him. Otherwise, he would be in serious trouble. He noticed the boars running toward him and wondered if they had seen him. As one boar roared and charged at him, Chin began to run. He worried that his frequent use of the swift cheetah skill was taking a toll on him, as his knees were burning. If this continued, his legs might give out before he was exhausted. He hoped he was running in the right direction. Chin came across a pile of mud, and holding his breath to avoid the smell, leaped into it. The boars arrived but couldn't detect his scent. He speculated that the boars were nearly blind at night and relied on their sense of smell to navigate. Since he was hidden in the dung and his smell was masked, he hoped they wouldn't find him as long as he remained silent. They all slept there, and Chin thought he would have to stay hidden for the time being. The dunghill was uncomfortably hot, likely due to the heat generated by the microorganisms decomposing the waste. He could barely feel his legs and arms and tried to keep his mind active to stay awake, but despite his efforts, he slipped into a deep sleep. He felt that the boars wouldn't leave until dawn, so he had to remain hidden in the dunghill for the night. The smell covered him, making it unlikely that the boars would find him. After a long rest, he felt ready to use the swift cheetah skill again. Suddenly, he heard Lin's voice and wondered if it was an illusion. But to his surprise, Lin arrived with Silly, who was visibly agitated. Lin had been worried about Chin and had seen him among the wild boars. With Silly's help, she drove the boars away. Chin emerged from the dunghill and assured her that he was fine, though he was covered in filth. He asked her not to come closer due to his dirty condition. His legs buckled, causing him to fall, but Lin quickly supported him to help him regain his balance. He apologized, explaining that he felt dizzy because he hadn't had dinner. Lin expressed her concern about the danger he had faced and suggested they return to camp. She asked Silly to hold on for a bit longer, and once they were back, Silly would get a good rest. As they made their way back to the camp, Lin and Chin rode on Silly. Lin asked him to hold her tightly, and he agreed. As he held her, he thought about how her clothes might have been torn to use as makeshift gauze. It also occurred to him that he needed to get to know her better. The next morning, they arrived at the river, and Chin lay down in the water, clothes and all. Taking advantage of Silly's cover, Lin managed to bathe and told Chin not to come near while she was washing. He agreed, and after Lin finished, Chin, now dressed in leaves, found Lin fast asleep. He went to the kitchen to search for food and noticed the condition of the boars. He wondered if any other beasts had come to eat them. As he thought about how Lin made the torches, he couldn't help but imagine her expression while she was extracting lard from the wolf boars' stomachs. His curiosity about her methods grew. Sitting there, Chin felt significant pain in his knees, and he couldn't believe what had happened to them. It would take a long time to recover, and it seemed unlikely that he could use the swift cheetah skill repeatedly in the future without risking further injury. He earned 7,000 points for escaping from the snake and decided to let Lin know about the honey locust seed porridge, wondering if she would like some. As he sat there, he noted how fragile she looked. He even questioned whether the brave Lin he had seen last night was just an illusion. He hadn't expected her to be so courageous, coming to find him and preparing gauze and a torch. He began to understand her better. He then fell asleep there as well. At dinner that night, while they were eating together, Chin asked if she had followed his trail to find him. Lin confirmed she had, and inquired what was wrong. Chin explained that the trace was left by a titanoboa, which startled Lin. She asked if it was dangerous to stay there. Chin reassured her, saying that if the titanoboa had intended to attack, it wouldn't have waited this long. Lin then asked about Silly's food situation. Chin revealed that he had noticed the trace after going deeper into the forest, and suggested they should be fine if they moved to the other edge. He also thanked her for saving him, to which Lin replied that it was no problem. The next day, Chin woke up around noon, still feeling exhausted. His knees had become more swollen, but he didn't have time to assess the extent of the damage because they needed to hurry to smoke the meat of their 4 wild boars to prevent it from becoming rancid and stinky over time. As they worked, Lin remarked that the meat was cut into an unattractive shape. Chin responded that since it was meat, its appearance didn't matter. They spent half the day preserving the meat from one boar. Given how challenging it had been to hunt the boars, Chin made sure not to waste any edible or usable parts, starting with the internal organs since they couldn't be smoked or stored. He also planned to boil the bones into gelatin and made preparations for that as well. They hung the meat in the bamboo, and Lin asked how long it would take to smoke. Chin replied that it might take up to 2 days. Lin then asked if it was okay to leave so much meat outside. Chin explained that they had no other choice since their kitchen wasn't large enough to hold all the meat. After some time, Lin called Chin over and revealed that the smoked meat had been stolen. Chin was shocked when he saw the empty racks. Lin asked if it was possible that a beast had carried it away. Chin shook his head, explaining that the racks were too large to be moved easily. If a beast had taken the meat, there would have been some traces left behind, but there were none. He noted that the wolf animals like Silly would be vigilant, even while sleeping, and would have noticed any approaching animals. It seemed he would have to stay up and keep watch through the night. Lin suggested that they take shifts, as they had done before. Chin declined, saying he would sleep the whole day, which would make it easy for him to stay awake at night. He asked Lin to take care of the smoked meat while he was sleeping. After he slept, he woke up at night and asked how long he had been out. Lin told him it seemed to be around 10 o'clock. Chin acknowledged that he had slept for a long time. Lin then offered him some mint tea she had made. He thanked her, and as he sat outside, he reflected that the meat should be enough for them for about half a year. He also considered that the hides and tendons could be used to make clothes if dealt with properly. Before addressing the theft of the smoked meat, they needed to determine how it had disappeared. Chin hoped that it wasn't stolen by an animal, as he had guessed earlier. If it was, they would be in danger, as the animal would have approached the camp secretly and stolen the meat without leaving any traces. They could both fall victim to this threat if they weren't careful. As morning approached and the thief had not yet returned, Chin reasoned that if he were a thief, he wouldn't steal from the same place again so soon. He concluded that he would need to keep watch every night until he figured out who was responsible. Then, Chin noticed a golden eagle approaching. As he observed, the eagle began to take away a bamboo full of meat. Chin found this both surprising and mysterious. He explained everything to Lin, and she realized that the golden eagle was the thief. It made sense that it could steal the meat so secretly. However, since the smoking process was complete, they didn't have to worry once the meat was put into the pots. Chin mentioned that while they could store the meat, they shouldn't keep the racks. When Lin asked why, he explained that he planned to make a trap to catch and tame the eagle. To avoid alerting the eagle, the racks needed to remain as they were. Chin described his plan for the trap. He would place some meat in the center and use a rope to create a circle around it to capture the eagle's leg. He then decided to test the trap, and just as he was working on it, he was hit by an unexpected issue. He called Silly over to help him with the trap, reassuring Lin that Silly, with his thick skin and strong body, would not be hurt. Chin asked Silly to press down on the trap with his paws. Silly applied pressure but ended up breaking the trap. Chin then made a new one. As he sat down, he noticed Lin yawning and asked if she was feeling sleepy since she had woken up early. Lin admitted she was a bit tired and asked if he was sure the eagle would return. He replied that since the eagle had successfully obtained meat for 2 consecutive days, it was likely to return. Finally, the eagle arrived and, spotting the fish, rushed to catch it. As it landed, the rope ensnared its legs, trapping it. Lin asked why they were just waiting. Koyan told her to stay calm and explained that it wasn't the right time to approach. Not only did the golden eagle have sharp claws, but its beak could also cause significant damage. If they got too close, they might be blinded or injured, so it was better to let the eagle struggle for a while before approaching once it was exhausted. As the eagle began to cut through the rope with its beak, they approached it. Lin noted that the eagle was so large it reached above her waist. Chin teased her, saying her legs were shot, but Lin corrected him, saying it nearly reached his waist. Chin clarified that he wasn't referring to her height, and agreed that the eagle was indeed larger than usual. He compared it to the rice field eel, which was bigger than normal, and noted that Silly and the snake were similarly oversized. He remarked that having 3 unusual incidents was worth pondering. Lin then asked why the eagle was called the golden eagle when its feathers were brown. Chin replied that he had never heard such a term. In Chinese, dummy is similar to sand eagle. Lin asked if he was planning to name the eagle Dummy. Chin made a puzzled face but then decided it was fine, and thus named the eagle Dummy. Lin asked if Chin intended to tame Dummy. Noticing the taming stamp on his hand, Chin realized he could use it for taming the eagle. However, he found that Dummy was not yet fully subdued, so he decided not to use the taming stamp just yet. Chin then asked Lin if she knew about falconry. She inquired if he was planning to train the eagle in that manner and warned him that it could be very dangerous. Chin acknowledged the risk, noting that it wasn't just about him. The process of falconry involves removing the bird's wild instincts, and the number of people involved doesn't matter as long as the goal is achieved. He explained that if he did it alone, it might take about a month, as he couldn't constantly monitor the eagle without sleep. However, if Lin helped, they could tame the eagle in about a week, as the eagle would have no chance to relax. They would take turns training the eagle, with Lin handling the day shift. Chin asked her to wake him up if he didn't wake up on his own. As they began, the eagle tried to escape by cutting the rope, but Lin struck the bamboo against the ground to scare the eagle and warned it not to attempt escape again. At night, while Chin was watching over the eagle, he used a toothbrush and earned a reward of 200 points for his efforts. He showed the toothbrush to the eagle, commenting that it wasn't so bad. The eagle turned its face away in response. Chin mused about how many days it would continue to act this way. On the 3rd morning, as the eagle hung down, Silly roared to scare it. Lin, sitting nearby, covered Chin's arm with boarskin. The process continued, and by the 5th morning, Chin told the eagle it was time to surrender, promising it would be set free. The eagle lowered its head in submission. Chin successfully tamed the eagle and was pleased with the result. He then inspected the eagle's belongings and discovered its babies. When Lin came out, she was surprised to find that Chin had tamed the eagle much faster than they had expected. Chin speculated that the eagle might have been worried about its babies. Lin asked how he knew that. Chin replied it was just a guess, noting that the breeding season for golden eagles is usually in the summer, so it was normal for them to have offspring around this time. Lin suggested that if they raised the eagles young, they would end up with 2 golden eagles. Chin agreed and mentioned that he planned to take a break that day. He then asked Dummy to lead them to its nest. As Dummy perched on his hand, Lin commented that the eagle looked even cooler up close. However, Dummy acted aggressively towards her. Lin wondered why she couldn't touch Dummy and why they hadn't tamed it together. Chin explained that Dummy had surrendered only to him. Lin then arrived with some fish. Chin observed that although Dummy was a fierce golden eagle, it acted more like a large hen as it eagerly rushed towards the fish. The next day, they planned to visit Dummy's nest. Chin knew that one of Dummy's chicks had fallen from the nest and survived, but it had fallen into a crevice in the mountain. Despite Dummy's efforts to rescue it, the situation remained challenging. Lin left enough food for the eagle chick, so Chin wasn't worried that it would die of hunger. However, the chick was too small to climb back up to the nest on its own and wouldn't be able to withstand the cold at night. If it rained, the chick would surely die, so they needed to hurry to rescue it. Despite walking all day, they were still lost in the forest. In the evening, they took a rest and prepared dinner. Chin mentioned that he could smell the aroma of the meat. Lin noted that the forest was so vast that they hadn't managed to get out despite walking for an entire day. Chin agreed and began to imagine their location. He wondered why no rescue teams had come to find them on such a large island. or if it was possible that the island hadn't been explored at all. Lin asked what he was thinking about. Chin replied that he was wondering whether they might encounter any beasts. Lin asked him not to frighten her. As they were sleeping that night, they heard howling sounds. Silly woke up, and Lin wondered what was wrong, as Silly had become aggressive. Chin saw that some wild wolves were approaching. Lin was visibly frightened by their presence. Chin asked Lin to stay calm, assuring her that the wolves wouldn't attack as long as Silly was there. As Silly roared at the wolves, Chin instructed him to calm down and told Lin to come inside. He thought about how vulnerable they would be if Silly left, considering that both he and Lin could be in danger. It was unfortunate that Dummy was nearly blind at night, as it meant they had to be extra cautious. The wolves appeared to be intimidated by the fire, so Chin asked Lin to make some torches. He recalled that all beasts were generally afraid of fire, and hoped that the wolves would not dare to approach because of their fear and Silly's presence. As Lin prepared 2 torches, one for each of them, Chin prepared himself for a possible confrontation, knowing they might need to fight off the wolves if they came any closer. He threw the torch toward the wolves and asked Lin to do the same. He then instructed Silly to move. Silly roared, frightening the wolves into fleeing. Chin remarked that it was good the wolves had run away, but Tenya might still be nearby. Lin told him to stop speaking nonsense. As morning approached, they continued walking, and Tenya finally emerged from the forest. She remarked that it felt as though she had entered another world, a term with which Chin agreed. When Tenya heard Dummy's call, Lin wondered what had happened to it. Chin explained that its nest was nearby, and it would be eager to see her baby. As they walked, Tenya approached the mountain. Lin, exhausted, commented on how steep the mountain was. Chin asked her and Silly to stay behind while he climbed alone. Lin urged him to be careful. He began climbing the mountain, thinking that if he had been any slower, he might have fallen. Eventually, he reached the top. Looking around, he spotted a volcano with trees at its base, which likely indicated it was dormant and had not erupted for a long time. They would not need to worry about it erupting soon. He decided to take a look around the area as well. Dummy cried out, so Chin checked on Dummy's baby and secured the ropes to help with the descent. Carefully, he brought the baby up. Dummy was overjoyed to be reunited with her child. Afterward, Chin returned the baby and began his descent, reflecting that climbing up had been manageable, but coming down was much more challenging. Despite the difficulty, he eventually made it back down and hoped he wouldn't have to climb a mountain like that again. When he reached the bottom, he discovered that Silly and Lin were missing. He saw that Lin had left a note indicating they had gone to search for resources. Feeling exhausted, he decided to wait there. The weather grew cloudy, and eventually, Lin and Silly returned, warning that a storm appeared to be approaching. Chin suggested they leave immediately to avoid problems if the storm caused the Murdoch River to flood. Lin was shocked to see something and asked him to look. He saw that it was a plane. He noted that it seemed to have crashed and suggested they leave. As they walked, Lin wondered if the plane was out of order and if the people aboard had survived. She asked Chin what they should do. He advised her to calm down and take a good look. Chin thought that if a plane had crashed there, Tenya might have escaped from it. He noticed that Lin was quite flustered, and even his own heart was racing. They reached the end of the mountain and saw the plane wrecked far away in the forest. He decided they shouldn't chase it blindly and suggested they stop and examine the plane before proceeding. He drew a map with lines marking their locations. The cross marked the plane's crash site, while the circle indicated their camp. He explained that they had enough food to return to camp, but if they went to the plane, they might face food shortages. Lin added that Tenya wouldn't find the plane easily, which would allow them to store more provisions. She asked if they should return to camp and then address the situation. He declined, stating that if he went to the plane alone, there would still be enough food. However, he asked if she could return to camp alone, to which she agreed. That night, Tenya cooked the food. Lin remarked that Dummy's baby was very cute and that she planned to raise it. Chin advised her to ensure it understood her commands. Lin pondered names and decided to call it Bai, rejecting Chin's suggestion of Little Dummy. She noted that Dummy and Silly were good names and that she might not appreciate his naming style. The next morning, Lin handed him some rosin, and he asked where she had found it. She explained that she had scraped it from a pine tree the previous day and hadn't had time to tell him. The rosin would be used to make torches. He thanked her for her help, and she reminded him to be careful. After that, he left, planning to use his talent every 2 hours. He rushed north without slowing down. He reflected on how the weather had changed randomly the previous day, and noted that, although it hadn't rained, the land was still quite different. He asked Dummy to scout ahead for potential hazards. Seeing what Dummy observed, Chin thought that the beast-taming stamp could help him understand what Dummy encountered, reducing his worries about meeting something unfamiliar. He came across a lot of water and wondered if it was a lake or a river. He decided to investigate further. He quickly discovered a swamp and considered going around it for safety. However, he encountered more swamps and realized he needed to navigate around them. The swamps seemed endless, and the mosquitoes were more numerous than he had anticipated, posing a risk of infection if he scratched after being bitten. He resolved to leave the swamps before dusk, as he didn't want to stay there overnight. He was concerned that the stagnant water in the swamps likely harbored many bacteria, and that his feet shouldn't remain submerged for too long to avoid fungal infections. Nonetheless, he prepared himself to wade through the water if necessary. He felt incredibly hot as the fog lifted. He was still in the swamp, and after drinking some water, he found it odd that it hadn't rained the previous day despite the dark clouds overhead. Suddenly, he saw a snake very close to him, and Dummy swiftly came to remove it, causing Chin to startle. He realized the snake was similar to the one he had encountered before, which was difficult to distinguish. Once he reached solid ground, he decided to use his talent. He began running, thinking that if the path ahead was as good as this, he would reach the crash site before dusk. However, he soon stepped into a mire and began to sink. He tried to stay calm, noting that the mire was similar to quicksand, which he had previously encountered and found difficult to escape from. To slow the sinking, he adopted a lying posture and hurriedly took action. He asked Dummy to fetch some longer and sturdier branches. He estimated he had about 2 hours to resolve the situation. Dummy returned with several branches, and Chin used them to create a makeshift platform. He realized that the mire was behaving like a sure-thinning fluid, a type of non-Newtonian fluid that changes its viscosity under stress. He realized he needed to maneuver out of the mire flexibly rather than struggle against it. He created a board-like platform to distribute his weight, hoping that applying pressure over a larger area would help him remain on the surface. Once on the board, he found it exhausting to spend an hour extricating himself from the mire. It was challenging to discern the ground beneath. He needed to find an alternative way to progress. Reflecting on a technique he had seen on TV for crossing quicksand, he used his knife to cut the branches into equal lengths and grouped them into sets of 4. He placed one set into the mire and tested it by pressing his foot down. It didn't sink, so he made additional sets. Using these branches, he effectively created a sort of makeshift ski, allowing him to move more quickly over the mire. The crash site was now within reach, and he wondered about the pilot's condition. The scene shifted to the plane, where the pilot, a woman, was trying to piece together what had happened. She recalled encountering a storm during her flight, which led to the plane losing control and experiencing turbulence. She managed to partially regain control before the crash, but the plane was severely damaged. Fortunately, she was unharmed. As she surveyed her surroundings, she noticed a swamp that resembled one she had encountered during a previous adventure in South America. She wondered if anyone else was living in the area. She called out to see if anyone was around, wondering how anyone could be in the wilds as the sun was setting. It seemed safer to stay on the plane that night. She heard some sounds and wondered if someone was nearby. Chin was also calling out to see if anyone could hear him. He was concerned that it would be dire if the pilot was injured and knew he needed to find her. Dummy made a sound, indicating the presence of a large white bird nearby. Chin asked Dummy to lead him to it. As he approached, he saw the plane from a distance and called out again, asking if anyone was there. Receiving no reply, he became increasingly worried about the pilot's condition. When he reached the plane, he didn't find any blood trails and speculated that the pilot might have left temporarily. The plane appeared to be new but old-fashioned, lacking modern communication equipment. Suddenly, he heard a voice and saw the pilot running toward him. She urged him to run, warning of approaching crocodiles. Chin quickly assessed the situation and decided it was best to get inside the plane, reasoning that fighting crocodiles on land would be too dangerous. He helped the pilot get inside the plane. She stumbled and fell onto him, and after getting up, she apologized and asked what was happening. He told her to look outside. They were surrounded by crocodiles. The pilot was puzzled by the crocodiles' aggression. They were striking the plane, and Chin knew he needed to act. He used a stone arrow to attack, but it wasn't sharp enough to penetrate their tough scales. He tried to aim for their eyes, but the small target and the crocodile's movement made it difficult to hit them accurately. The arrows didn't seem to cause any harm, and instead, the crocodiles attacked more aggressively, shaking the plane. Chin realized that if the crocodiles continued their assault, the plane would be destroyed within 15 minutes. He decided to use the system to find a solution. He realized he wouldn't be able to buy anything with his 12,700 points. Although he considered using them to acquire a talent, he decided against it. He thought that the scenery talent would be most useful in a dire situation, and the accurate centaur talent was related to shooting. The pilot suggested burning the crocodiles. Seeing alcohol, Chin asked her if he could have it, emphasizing its importance. As she handed it to him, he reflected on how challenging it was to communicate with her in her own language, and noted that alcohol was scarce on the island, making it a waste to use it up like this. Determined to deal with the crocodiles, Chin decided to use his points to acquire a talent. He recalled how he had felt a clear change in his body after obtaining the swift cheetah talent previously, but currently, he didn't sense any difference. The pilot warned him to be cautious. Chin thought the situation was critical and that he needed to handle it himself. He coated the arrow tips with rosin and ignited them with a lighter. Although the stone arrows lacked power, adding fire would make them more effective. He aimed for the crocodile's eyes using his skill and felt as if he were playing a shooting game. He realized that the point size table might represent his strength, while the wind speed table indicated the suggested angle. When all conditions were met, hitting the target became much easier. The system indeed worked as expected. The pilot, Jessica, handed him the burning arrows one by one, and he shot 7 of them. The crocodiles, now under attack, began to flee. Jessica was thrilled and referred to Chin as a hero. He introduced himself, saying his name was Chin, and asked for hers. She told him her name was Jessica and inquired about their location and whether there were others with him. Jessica spoke to him in French, which Chin found difficult to understand. He asked her to speak slowly, as he wasn't very fluent in French. Jessica then asked if he understood Chinese or Korean. Chin inquired if she had a mobile phone. Jessica replied that she was referring to a telephone, but there were no telephone wires in the area, so having a phone would be useless. They both struggled to communicate effectively. As night fell, they sat inside the plane and Jessica offered Chin a can of food. Chin observed her method of opening the can and thought it was quite complicated. When he noticed the manufacturing date on the can, 1927, he was shocked. Jessica noticed his concern and asked if there was a problem. Chin struggled to find the right words in English to ask if the can was expired. Jessica reassured him, saying it was just beef and not to worry. As Chin ate, he found the taste surprisingly good, though he was still puzzled by the can's production date. After a full day of walking, he felt sleepy, and he assumed Jessica must be extremely tired after the crash and the crocodile attack. Since no wild beasts could get into the plane, he decided it was best to spend the night there. Jessica settled down to sleep and wished him a good rest. The next morning, Chin woke up to find that Jessica was no longer at his side. As he got up, she greeted him. Noticing the pots and bowls in her backpack, he wondered how much she had brought with her. He decided he wanted to have soup for breakfast and showed her the pork soup he had prepared. Jessica remarked that it sounded interesting. Jessica cooked the soup, and after eating, she felt refreshed. She wanted to ask him many questions, but Chin only knew a few words of her language and struggled to understand her fully. He drew a map from their current location to the camp and managed to explain it to her somehow. He hoped that Lin might be able to communicate better, so he suggested that Jessica come with him to the camp, which she agreed to. Chin regretted not having any tools. Otherwise, he would have removed something useful from the plane. As they set out, Jessica was shocked to see the golden eagle and warned that it might be dangerous. Chin whistled to call Dummy over and reassured Jessica that Dummy was his pet, and not a threat. With that, they continued on their way. He felt guilty for handling Jessica's belongings without her permission, but he needed to find something that could help her. He rummaged through her bag and discovered various items: metal cutlery, sleeping bags, portable tents, pencils, and more. When he checked the medical kit, he found a battery that might be crucial for saving her life. He used the items he had to assemble a circuit, which began to bubble, indicating that it was working. He then used the tourniquet to help deliver oxygen to Jessica, and waited anxiously for the results. After a while, Jessica woke up and asked what had happened. Chin checked to make sure she was okay, and explained that they had been surrounded by methane gas. She suggested they leave the area immediately. Chin assessed that they had enough oxygen to last for a while longer, but since the electricity was depleted, they needed to exit the swamp before it ran out completely. They managed to make their way out of the fog, and Jessica commented on how refreshing the air was outside. They decided to rest for the night, planning to head to the camp the next day. Meanwhile, at the camp, Lin noticed that some raccoons were stealing the fish. She was frustrated by the theft and decided to make a bamboo lid that night to prevent further pilfering. As she worked, the baby eagle arrived, making a noise. Lin offered it a small fish, hoping it would grow quickly. She couldn't help but worry, as it had been 3 days since Chin had left. She considered that something might have happened to him and thought about searching for him with Silly the next day. The baby eagle made a noise while looking at the sky, and Lin spotted Dummy, realizing that Chin must have arrived. She was surprised to see Jessica as well. Jessica greeted Lin, and Chin explained that Jessica was the pilot of the crashed plane. He admitted that he had trouble understanding her language and wasn't sure if she was part of a rescue team, so he left the task of communication to Lin. Lin spoke with Jessica, who introduced herself. She noted that Jessica had not spoken to him in English. Jessica responded that since they first met, Chin had been speaking in French, which she did not understand. She was unsure which language Chin actually spoke. Chin wondered if it was his fault for trying so hard to speak a language she didn't understand. That night, the three of them had a long conversation. Chin explained how he and Lin ended up on the deserted island, while Jessica shared that she was a paleontologist traveling the world to study and learn different languages. After their conversation, Lin realized that Jessica was not part of a rescue team. Chin noted that they now had a clearer understanding of the island's location based on the course of Jessica's plane and the ship they were traveling on. Lin agreed, suggesting that they should build a boat and leave the island soon. Jessica's demeanor seemed remarkably calm despite being stranded. She explained that she was thrilled because she had seen a real primal panda, which was thought to be extinct long ago. The island's unique wildlife made her feel as if she was in paradise. Lin pointed out that Jessica seemed eager to study the island's creatures in depth, and Silly looked alarmed at the thought. Chin asked if paleontologists were generally so intimidating. He also inquired whether Jessica was concerned about being unable to leave the island. Jessica assured him that they would definitely leave one day, and she was excited about the discovery of the primal panda, which she believed would be one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the 20th century. Lin corrected her, noting that it was already the 21st century. Jessica argued that there were still over 70 years left before the 21st century began, but Lin corrected her, stating that it was already the 21st century. Jessica then asked if the Republic of China used a different calendar. Chin clarified that they used the international calendar and that they were from the People's Republic of China, not the Republic of China. Jessica wondered if a different political party was in power. Chin and Lin told her it was enough discussion on that topic. Jessica apologized, explaining that she meant no offense, and asked if she had said something wrong. She noted that Jessica seemed so absorbed in paleontology that she lacked interest in history, but he hoped she would remember what he was about to say. He explained that the People's Republic of China was founded on October 1st, 1949. Jessica was taken aback and thought Chin was joking, but his serious demeanor made her feel as if she had been in a coma for over 20 years. She insisted that it was 1927, not 1949. Both Chin and Lin were shocked by this revelation. Chin thought that she didn't seem to be lying, and the plane was indeed an old model. The camera she gave him wasn't expired either. He then asked Jessica what year it was. She told him it was 1927 and asked him for the current year. He replied that it was 2020. She was shocked and asked if they both came from the future. He replied that he didn't think so. He remembered she had mentioned suffering a storm before the plane crashed, so he asked her to explain in detail. She said she had departed from Paris for the South Pacific, heading towards a place called He. It had been a sunny day initially, but she was suddenly caught in a storm when she was completely unprepared. During the storm, the instrument panel failed, and before she realized what was happening, the plane plunged towards the deserted land. Lin mentioned that they had experienced something similar when they were on a ship. Chin speculated that the storm might have been like a time tunnel, similar to the Bermuda Triangle, and that they were all caught in it. They wondered if they had accidentally traveled through time and, if so, which era they were currently in. They were full of questions about how to return and how to explain the presence of primal pandas, titan pythons, and the fact that they all came from different eras. Sheen suggested they set aside these questions and focus on finding a way to live better in their current situation. Jessica asked if he thought Silky had also been brought there by the storm. Chin replied that it was likely and suggested that the titan python in the bamboo forest might have been brought there by the same storm. Jessica inquired if Chin had encountered the titan python. He confirmed that it had settled deep in the bamboo forest, so they hadn't dared to approach it. Jessica described the snake in great detail and wondered if it had evolved due to environmental changes, or if all previous research funding had been misguided, which piqued her curiosity. Lin asked if the snake could still survive in the bamboo forest during heavy rains. It was summer, with daytime temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius, and since the wild boars became agitated every time it rained heavily, she speculated about the snake's ability to endure such conditions. Jessica asked for an explanation, and after Chin told her everything, she responded that if the temperature was high enough with abundant rain, The Titan python could indeed survive in the bamboo forest, but likely only in limited areas, such as the forest itself. This could explain why the boars went mad during stormy nights. However, she wondered where the snake went during the rain and if it might have taken refuge in a cave, though the cave's temperature might not be high enough. Chin replied that there was no need to worry about it, as they hadn't ventured close to the snake. Lin admitted that she had been scared of the snake before, and then suggested that Jessica take the bed while Lin would keep watch that night. Jessica insisted that Lin didn't need to do that and asked if Lin and Chin were in a relationship. Lin replied that they were not. Jessica then asked if Lin had ever considered it. When Lin questioned why Jessica was asking such sudden questions, Jessica confessed that if Lin had not thought about it, she would sleep in the same bed as Chin. She took Chin's hand and told him it depended on him. She admitted that she had become infatuated with him due to his bravery and protection, and had fallen in love with him. She simply asked if he would be her boyfriend. He freed himself from Jessica's grasp, looked at Lin, and told Jessica to calm down. He quoted a saying from a respected figure in their nation, advising against dating anyone unless they were prepared for marriage. Since they had only known each other for less than a week, he suggested they remain friends. Jessica, with a romantic gesture, referred to him as a hero, and proposed that they get to know each other better over the following days. He then pointed out that there was a sleeping bag available and that it was getting quite late. He climbed into the sleeping bag, zipped it up, and wished everyone a good night. Afterward, Jessica removed her dirty clothes, and when Lin asked why, Jessica explained that sleeping without clothes was simply more comfortable. Lin thought that Jessica was quite extroverted. Lin noticed that Chin was watching, so she gave him a nudge. Chin apologized for his mistake and asked for her understanding. The next morning, as Chin woke up, Jessica greeted him, and he responded in kind. Lin arrived with soup, greeting him as she handed it over. She explained that she had made meat soup, but was only giving him the soup, not the meat. He accepted the soup and stepped out of the cave. Jessica asked if he was offended by Lin's gesture. Lin denied it, saying there was still plenty of meat in the kitchen and that she was just joking. Jessica then mentioned that she understood Lin had feelings for Chin, but Lin denied it. Jessica explained that polygamy was widely practiced in her nation, mentioning the roles of first wife, second wife, and so on. She shared that she had heard about this from an elderly woman during her youth in China. Jessica then suggested they all be together, stating that since Lin had met Chin first, Lin would be considered the first. Lin, covering her ears, turned away and told Jessica to enjoy the soup while she would bring something more for her. Jessica remarked that Lin was very shy and sweet, wondering if she had overstepped. When Chin reached the kitchen and saw Lin sitting there, he asked what had happened. Lin simply said that she was the first one. He asked what that was about. Lin, feeling embarrassed, said it was nothing. He inquired if Jessica had said something to her. Afterwards, the three of them gathered to discuss their plans, which they divided into 2 stages. The first stage was to explore the island and settle there for the foreseeable future. Currently, with the help of Silly and Dummy, Chin had gained 2 talents that made them less fearful of the boars. However, Chin still planned to build barriers around the entire grassland to prevent boar incursions. He also decided to capture some baby boars for captive breeding, ensuring a stable food source as winter approached and the situation might change. They aimed to explore the island to find iron and copper, which would be useful for them. The second stage involved building a boat, which was their ultimate goal. They agreed that it would be pointless to consider this stage until the first stage was complete, and building the boat would take several years. Jessica mentioned that there were still many items in her bag that might be useful in the future, and suggested that Chin take a look to see if he needed any of them. As Lin saw the clothes Jessica had, she asked if they were for her. Jessica confirmed that they were and offered them to Lin if she wanted. She even showed Lin one outfit that would look good on her. Lin thanked Jessica for the thoughtful gift. Chia noticed his own worn clothes and mentioned feeling envious of their new attire. However, he was pleased that Jessica also had some iron tools that would help them cut bamboo. The next morning, Chin went to the bamboo forest with Silly and observed that the bamboo had grown rapidly over a few days. He suggested they head back, and that Silky could have the bamboo after they returned. He then asked Dummy about the situation in the forest. He discovered that Dummy had not been able to find the snake, confirming Jessica's assessment. There were likely no threats near the dung, so they finally reached their destination. He found that the dung still smelled as bad as before, and couldn't believe he had jumped into it. He noted that the dung had likely accumulated over a long period. He then heated some sticks and thought that it might be nitrate soil, which is usually produced in places with accumulated dung, such as old walls, cliff edges, caves, and areas where rain doesn't easily wash it away. He planned to extract the potassium nitrate from the soil, which would allow them to make black powder, adding an extra layer of defense. He also thought the boars would likely return from foraging soon, so he would gather some bamboo for Silly and then head back. Upon returning to camp, Lin asked if he had encountered any dangerous situations. Jessica then showed him the bathtub they had made. It seemed that there was indeed a significant amount of nitrate soil in the bamboo forest, as he had speculated. He agreed, noting that he had collected a lot of it and would handle it. He asked Lin to show Jessica around the area. Jessica offered to lead Lin and Chin to walk by the stream nearby. By the middle of the next day, Lin inquired if Chin had finished making the bathtub. He confirmed that he had, and began to explain the entire process of purifying the nitrate to them. In the evening, Jessica announced that they were almost finished. Lin's hands were sore from the work. Chin expressed his appreciation for their efforts, and mentioned that they would drink that night and make black powder the next day. Lin asked about the use of the black powder, and Chin explained they would be making bombs. Later that night, as they talked about the future, Jessica asked about various advancements, such as China landing on the moon and other topics. During their conversation, Jessica mentioned that her father had planned to start a company, so he went for marketing research. Chin was surprised to learn that she came from a wealthy background. He suggested they forget about it and focus on surviving on the island. He then encouraged everyone to get some sleep, as they would be making bombs the next day. The following day, Chin explained the process and worked on making the bomb. They combined potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal in the correct ratio. When Lin came to check on their progress, Chin confirmed that they were done. They tested it, resulting in a small blast. Seeing this, Jessica and Lin were thrilled. Chin advised them not to celebrate too soon, as they had not yet achieved their ultimate goal. Lin agreed, noting that it would be meaningless if they couldn't turn the black powder into effective weapons. Jessica suggested they start making the bombs. Chin mixed the ingredients in the correct ratio inside a bamboo shoot to create a simple bomb. Lin commented that Chin seemed very familiar with the process, and Jessica added that it might not be his first time making explosives. Chin confirmed this, mentioning that he had used similar techniques to blow up fish, toilets, and other things. He then recalled some embarrassing incidents from his childhood. Lin asked what Chin was laughing about. He replied that it was nothing in particular, just that he couldn't help but laugh when he thought about those past incidents. He then instructed them to take Silky and everyone else to the cave, as he was about to test the bomb. He warned them to stay back and proceeded to light the fuse. The bomb produced a satisfying blast, and Chin earned 5,000 points for making it. Jessica commented that the bomb wasn't very powerful and questioned whether they had used enough black powder. Chin explained that while the amount of black powder does affect the bomb's power, the quality of the black powder is even more crucial. Lin asked if Chin meant that the potassium nitrate needed to be purer. He replied that the bamboo tube bombs wouldn't be lethal to a giant beast, but were sufficient to scare them away. That night, he increased the amount of powder in the bomb to make it a bit more dangerous. Over the next few days, they planned to build fortifications in the camp, and also started making bricks for walls. By mid-June, Chin was fitting long logs as support for the house. He found that the weather was already quite hot, and anticipated that it would only get worse during the peak summer heat. He thought it would be best to stay hydrated, so he drank the cool boiled water that Lin had prepared, though he wished he had some ice water. He checked the nitrate soil he had been carrying back and had stored enough potassium nitrate. He then began preparing something to eat, making sure to cover it while he worked. Lin and Jessica arrived, with Lin bringing grapes for him. When he asked where she had found them, Lin explained that they had come across them on their way back. Jessica added that Lin had planned to surprise him, and was excited about it. Lin said it wasn't necessary to mention it. Chin decided to reward Lin with a smoothie, which he showed to both of them. After they tasted it, he asked for their opinions. Lin replied that it was incredibly tasty, melting slowly in her mouth with the sweet and sour flavors of raspberries capturing her taste buds. She likened the experience to surfing in an ocean. Curious, Jessica asked how Chin had made it. He explained that the coolness of the smoothie came from the potassium nitrate in the water, which could absorb a lot of heat. Jessica was surprised, noting that she didn't know potassium nitrate could be used in that way, and complimented Chin on his ingenuity. Chin then asked Lin if she had noticed the flavor of the smoothie and suggested that adding some grape juice might improve it. When Lin didn't respond, he asked if she had heard him. Chin asked Lin to make some additional earthen pots to store ice more conveniently, similar to Russian nesting dolls. Meanwhile, Jessica was squeezing grapes. After finishing, she approached Chin and asked what he was doing. He replied that he was making fan blades for an electric fan. Lin inquired if he was making an actual electric fan, to which he denied and explained that he was only making the fan blades, not the entire fan. Jessica then asked why he was making the blades. He responded that he intended to use them to create fans. Lin questioned whether it would be a manual fan, and he explained that it would be considered automatic or perhaps pneumatic. He elaborated that he planned to design a fan that would rotate using steam from boiling water, which would, in turn, drive the fan to spin. Jessica remarked that it sounded similar to a steam engine. Lin suggested adding a condenser, and Chin agreed that it was a great idea. The scene then shifts to July, when they successfully completed the steam generator and added a condenser. At that time, they also made popsicles using raspberry juice. As Chin worked, Silly appeared delighted. Chin asked Silly to calm down, knowing that Silly was addicted to the taste of the popsicles. While the four of them were eating, Lin mentioned that the popsicles and the fan helped them cool down, making it easier to endure the hot summer. She then inquired about Dummy and Bai. Chin replied that the temperature was normal for them and that he planned to prepare some ice water for them later. Soon, rain clouds arrived, bringing lightning and thunder. Lin expressed concern that they hadn't finished building the fence before the rainstorm and wondered what might happen if the boars became agitated again. Chin reassured her, saying not to worry as they had various pieces of equipment. He reminded her that he had the talent of the accurate centaur. Dummy had joined them, and they had bombs, so they were well prepared for the boars. Suddenly, they heard a noise and saw that the boars had returned. Jessica expressed interest in seeing what it looked like when the boars were angry. Lin decided to follow her to observe. Chin and Jessica arrived at the line of logs they had set up, and Chin remarked that he hadn't expected the rain to be so heavy. Jessica noted that the other feathers of the eagles were impervious to water due to the oily substance on their surface. As long as they weren't exposed to the rain for too long, their wings wouldn't get too wet to fly. Chin said they couldn't let the boars destroy their defenses. Using his skill, he shot an arrow into one of the boar's eyes, causing the boars to split into two groups. One group was tackled by Silly and Dummy, who engaged them in battle. Chin observed that although Silly and Dummy had managed to fend off part of the boars, others were still approaching him, threatening to breach their defenses. Lin then warned everyone to stay back because there was a bomb nearby. Lin warned Chin and Jessica to watch themselves. As the bomb exploded, the boars were frightened and ran away. Chin asked if they thought the boars could come and go as they pleased without consequences, and he emphasized that they needed to pay the price before leaving. They managed to kill a few more boars as well. Chin instructed Dummy and Silly not to chase after the boars. He reasoned that a normal boar grows about 50 kilograms a year, and if they killed too many and damaged their ability to regenerate, the boar population might continuously decline. He believed in sustainable development and would not harm the source of their resources. They had stored enough food for 6 months, and now Chin planned to focus on creating more powerful explosives. They finished repairing the fence in the last few days before the rainy season. With constant rain on the island, Chin decided they should stay put and check on the wine they had been making. Jessica was excited as they had made it themselves, but Lin wondered how it would taste. When they checked, they found it had a terrible smell. Jessica questioned whether she had made a mistake in the brewing process. He explained that the white foam was carbon dioxide bubbles produced during fermentation, which was absolutely normal. The homemade wine he had made before also had foam. They simply needed to filter it out. To do this, he prepared a cloth to cover another pot and began transferring the wine to be filtered. Once the filtering was complete, he asked who would be drinking it. They each took a sip, and Jessica remarked that it was too sour. Chin explained that the newly made wine was supposed to be sour and would become sweeter over time. The balsamic vinegar was also almost ready. He then inquired if they had finished with the wine and, if it was too sour to drink, suggested setting it aside for now. He mentioned that they had other work to focus on. Lin asked what the next task was, and he explained that they would be distilling ethanol. He described the process and began the work. Jessica asked how long it would take. Chin asked them to wait, assuring them that they should be finished by that night. Barring any accidents, the ethanol produced would be sufficient for their needs for a long time. Jessica then asked if he liked tofu, and Chin replied that he did not. Then Lin arrived with soda and brown sugar and asked what they were for. Chin replied that she would find out soon. He reminded them of the process and the ratios needed to prepare the drink. After mixing, he handed it to them to try. Lin asked if it was JLB sports drink. Jessica tasted it and found it to be very good. Chin explained that it tasted like a spirit drink, and he wasn't sure if he had the recipe exactly right. Jessica inquired about what JLB was. Chia noted that the flavor of the drink reminded him of cola and suggested that she would find it to be the Chinese version of cola. Another month passed, and the team had expanded their camp significantly, creating many new items. Sheen was rewarded with 2,000 points. As summer came to an end, spy was also growing, and Lin was teaching her to follow commands. Chin came over and thanked Lin for altering his clothes, noting how comfortable they were. She asked if everything fit well and mentioned she would continue to make adjustments when they returned. Chin said it was good enough and didn't require further changes. Lin reminisced about the time she spent working on the clothing. Chin showed off a bag he had made from boar skin, explaining that it was durable and large enough to hold ropes and his axe. He found it to be very handy. From that day on, the three of them began executing the latter half of their initial plan. According to the plan, Chin, Willie, and Dummy would explore the area where the plane had crashed, while Lin and Jessica would investigate the undiscovered area near the camp. Riding Silly, Chin had an idea. He jumped off Silly and started running, thinking that the wolves wouldn't attack him in that area since they hadn't before. He decided it was best to leave that night, but if any problems arose, he still had the bombs for protection. As autumn arrived, the icy winds roared every night. Chin was thankful for Jessica's tent and sleeping bag, which kept him warm. He reached the volcano and decided to climb to the top for a better view. He carefully navigated through the bushes to avoid tearing his trousers. He glanced at Silly and asked if the horse was tired. Silly smelled strongly, which Chin attributed to its keen sense of smell. He suspected it had detected sulfur. He told Silly to wait while he continued his ascent. Upon reaching the top, Chin discovered sulfur ore. He was excited about the prospect of making more bombs with it. While breaking rocks, he also found galena, which was new to him. He learned that galena was a raw material for flint glass and realized the importance of investing in necessary resources. Over the next 2 days, Chin made his way halfway up the peak each day, exploring the crater for minerals. He identified 7 or 8 mines on the volcano. Chin attempted to dig out the minerals, but the rock near the crater was extremely hard. His stone pickaxe broke into several pieces, and his back was sore from the effort. Then he saw Dummy arriving with a letter from Lin. It was incredibly useful to have Dummy for sending and receiving letters, as it could cover the distance in 1 hour that would take Chin an entire day to travel. Lin's letter said that they were doing fine and urged him to be careful. Chin felt a sense of relief knowing that someone was concerned for them. The next day, he decided to head downhill. With a rope in hand, he discovered that when the rope was placed in the sulfuric acid, it was so thick that bamboo tubes would corrode quickly. He decided to remove it from the area. Over the next 4 days, Chin searched for resources but found nothing particularly useful, as most of the valuable materials were already near his camp. On the 8th day, he decided to take the sulfur and minerals back to camp, using a different route. However, along the way, he encountered the swamp once again. He remembered the last time he came here with Jessica. They had been in a dire situation and nearly perished. He decided to take a different route this time. When they escaped from the swamp previously, the fog had been so thick that they could barely see the trees around them, with visibility reduced to less than 3 meters. Despite the fog, he had still noticed something unusual. Reflecting on his first visit to the swamp, he commanded Dummy to scout ahead and assess the current conditions. By observing clearly, he hoped to understand the fog's patterns and cycles, allowing him to search for treasures safely in the future. As he continued, he discovered 2-legged creatures in the swamp. He instructed Silly to stay put and moved ahead quickly to investigate. He approached at high speed, getting close enough to see that it was indeed a significant find. He decided to proceed no more than 500 meters. If he did not find what he was looking for, he would return. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the creatures were ancient humans, and some men were pursuing a girl. By running, the girl also fought back to deter her attackers. Eventually, she was surrounded by the men. Chin observed the scene from behind a tree, trying to understand what was happening. The way the men were attempting to stab her vital areas indicated that this was not a mere exercise but a genuine fight for her survival. Realizing that he couldn't just stand by and watch, Chin decided to intervene. He quickly prepared a smoke grenade and earned 3,000 points for crafting it. His heart raced, as this was the first time he was using his skills to attack humans. Although he might not face legal repercussions on the island, he was still troubled by the prospect of killing. He knew he had to act decisively to save the girl. He targeted a man's leg to create an opportunity for the girl to escape. Chin shot several arrows at the men, and in the chaos the girl noticed him. He then threw the smoke grenade toward the group, hoping it would provide the girl with a chance to flee. Feeling the urgency of the situation, Chin noticed that the girl was glancing back at the men as she stood still. He asked if she was frightened, but she merely began running again, with the men in hot pursuit. Chin assessed the situation and realized that the men were strong and experienced fighters. Even with his 2 talents, it seemed like a pipe dream to defeat them all. Observing that the girl was injured in the leg, Chin offered to carry her. She responded in her own language, which he couldn't understand. He saw her attempt to fend off the men and wondered if he should flee instead. He lifted her and, using his swift cheetah skill, dashed away from the scene. He planned to use a bomb to attack the men if they pursued them again, reasoning that it wouldn't be his fault if they were injured. As he made his escape, Dummy warned him of a large snake nearby. Chin saw that the Titan python had indeed arrived. The men had stopped in their tracks, stunned by the sight of the massive snake. Chin considered directing the python towards the men to distract them. However, to his shock, the Titan python turned its attention towards him. Realizing the snake was incredibly fast and he could not outrun it, Chin knew he had no choice but to use the same trick he had before. As the snake lunged at him, he managed to dodge the attack. Meanwhile, the girl took advantage of the chaos and climbed onto the snake's back. Chin observed that the snake's body was tilting and its scales were so smooth that it was extremely difficult to maintain balance. He also noted that his own constitution was likely too weak compared to hers. The girl stabbed her weapon into the snake, causing it to start falling. As the snake tried to strike her again, Chin used his swift cheetah skill to speed to her aid. He then threw a bomb into the snake's mouth, which caused a powerful explosion. The snake collapsed as a result. Chin quickly urged the girl to leave with him, and together they fled the scene. He believed they were now over 300 meters away from the snake and should be safe. However, he heard the snake let out a deafening roar. Chin thought that a fierce beast from ancient times was indeed formidable and evidently still alive. To his dismay, the snake began to rush towards them again. Desperate, Chin called out, urging anyone nearby to help. He promised that if he survived, he would worship them for the rest of his life. The girl responded in her language, but he couldn't understand her. He asked if she was worried that the snake might find them. Despite their situation, he reassured her that they needed to stay quiet. The snake's head loomed over them, making it impossible for them to be seen. Chin instructed Dummy to attack, which managed to make a scratch and create a distraction. Chin and the girl used the opportunity to move away. He reasoned that birds had a natural advantage over beasts on the ground, and they had finally managed to divert the Titan python's attention. Chin informed the girl that they were approaching the edge of the swamp and would be safe once they got out. They finally reached Silly, where the girl stepped in front to protect Chin alongside the wolf. Chin realized she must have mistaken Silly for a wild wolf, and he was grateful for her willingness to help. Silly, in turn, showed his trust by bowing to Chin. Chin explained that Silly was his pet, and the girl responded by bowing as well. China wondered about her actions. Even if he asked her, he thought she shouldn't be so submissive. He helped her onto Silly, and they continued their journey without stopping. The girl had a deep cut on her arm, and her leg wound was worsening, so immediate bandaging was essential. Once they rested, Chin noticed she was trying to start a fire. He showed her the lighter and demonstrated how to use it, which surprised her. Chin considered whether they needed a burned stick to stop the bleeding. He warned her it would be painful, then treated her arm wound. He also realized he needed to bandage her leg. When he saw the wound was bleeding internally, he chose to ignore that and focused on treating the visible wounds instead. After setting up the tent, Chin observed the girl sleeping while sitting up. Knowing it was cold outside, he decided she should rest inside the tent. However, when he touched her, she reacted aggressively and attacked him. When she saw him, she stopped and bowed. Chin understood that her past must have been harsh, and he couldn't accept her submission. He took her inside the tent, where she looked around curiously. Her stomach growled, and she felt embarrassed, punching her own stomach in response. Chin thought he might have been sick if he had received such firm punches. He gave her something to eat, and she accepted it with great respect. Chin wondered if she saw him as a king or something similar. He settled into his sleeping bag, thinking that the girl preferred to sleep this way, and noted that her thick skin should protect her from frostbite. The next morning, he was alerted by sounds coming from the girl. When he went outside to check, he found her attacking Dummy. He asked her to stop, and Dummy came to his side. Chin thanked Dummy for all his help. Over the next few days, Chin tried to communicate with the girl, but struggled to understand her. Finally, they arrived back at the camp, where Lin and Jessica came outside to greet him. Lin asked if he was hurt, mentioning the letter he sent them that said he had encountered the snake. She had been worried about him. Chin reassured her that he was fine as always. Jessica noticed the girl and asked if she was the one Chin had mentioned earlier. Jessica commented that the girl would be a good match for Chin, noting that she was a teenage girl. The girl spoke in her language, and Jessica, who understood her, clarified that they were not witches. They then had a conversation. Lin observed that Jessica seemed to be able to speak the girl's language, and Chin agreed that they could now communicate with her. After a while, Lin asked Jessica what they had discussed. Jessica revealed some shocking news. The girl was named Nick and belonged to a tribe called Lada. Lin replied that she had read about Lada in books on unsolved mysteries of the world. She explained that in August 1939, during the outbreak of World War II, there was a tribe named Lada in Yemen with a population of 50. They were suffering from a severe water shortage, and soldiers had come to take away their jujube trees. In August 1939, British soldiers had come to find that all the members of the tribe had disappeared, even though their belongings remained in their homes. The soldiers found this situation strange and reported it to their superiors, but no one was able to trace the missing people. Chin wondered if the tribespeople had somehow appeared on the island. Jessica asked Nick if this was indeed related to the events of 1939. Nick confirmed that her tribe had arrived on the island 3 years ago, so Jessica's information was accurate. Chin realized that there were now 50 more people on the island than originally known. He considered whether the Lada tribe could assist them in building boats, which would enable their departure from the island within a year. Jessica mentioned that Nick had told her that more people had arrived by boat and attacked her tribe, and she was the only one who managed to escape. Chin was concerned about this new threat. Lin suggested that they might be able to cooperate with the tribe to fight against these attackers together. Chin agreed, seeing it as their only option. Reflecting on the fog conditions in the swamp, Chin estimated that they would be safe for about 3 more months, which was enough time to devise a plan. Jessica added that Nick wanted to help and referred to Chin as a wizard. Chin was surprised by this description, feeling both puzzled and intrigued by how Nick perceived him. Jessica mentioned that Nick had said Chin was fighting a snake with a powerful magical weapon, treating her and making fire using witchcraft. The Lada tribe believed in a witchcraft god who could choose any girl to serve him, which made Nick happy. He responded that Nick had been very respectful and clarified that he was not a wizard. Jessica then asked if it was not advantageous to be a wizard. She had visited many tribes for her studies, and, as far as she knew, most of them were quite exclusive. Chin inquired if she meant that they should use this to gain their trust and assistance. He then agreed to pretend to be a wizard for once, which Jessica appreciated. Lin commented that Chin was smiling in a peculiar way. After that, Chin decided to assist her tribe. Jessica asked when they would begin learning Arabic, mentioning that she had learned it in 2 months. Chin questioned why he needed to learn it, noting that Jessica would be their interpreter. He lamented that despite spending decades learning French and still struggling with it, learning Arabic would take him forever. The system displayed the world language collection. After all the discussions, Lin prepared dinner for everyone. Chin went to the river to bathe while Nick used the bathroom. Jessica took Nick to the bathroom and asked him to remove his clothes. Nick was shocked by the request and entered the bathtub. Jessica noticed many old wounds on Nick's body and told him not to be shy, explaining that she might be at risk of infection if she didn't clean the wounds. Finally, Lin finished making dinner. Chin remarked that it was like a feast, especially with the chicken soup. Lin explained that Bai had caught a chicken while he was out having fun. As Jessica ate, she commented that Lin's cooking had improved. Chin suggested that Lin should become the chief chef of their camp. Lin responded that she hadn't thought of it that way, attributing the improvement to the fact that they hadn't had chicken for a long time. Jessica asked Nick if this wasn't how she normally ate. Nick denied it, saying that she was thrilled to have such delicious food, describing it as a real feast. Since they had started fleeing from the bandits, they had been lacking in food, having only 1 meal a day. She hadn't had a meal like this in a long time. As Jessica ate, she found the meal so delicious that it made her emotional, wishing her people were there to share it. For sleeping arrangements, Chin opted to sleep in the tent outside since the cave was too small. Jessica and Lin tried to get Nick to sleep on the bed, but Nick grabbed her weapons and curled up in a corner. The next day, Jessica began teaching Arabic to Chin and Lin. Lin asked Chin if he had figured out how to reach the Lada tribe. He replied that he wanted to create a mask to cross the swamp, but he had given up because of the presence of snakes. Lin suggested making a small boat to navigate the swamp. Chin appreciated the idea, noting that it would also give them more experience in building sea boats. He decided they should start immediately and went to cut trees. While cutting, Chin saw Nick approaching to tell him something. He regretted not having enough points to purchase the full edition of the World Language Collection. He told Nick not to help him, as he didn't want to rely on an injured child. However, Nick cut the tree with one hand, which astonished Chin. He wondered if she was faster than him. With Nick's help, they gathered enough wood in 3 days. Afterward, they began refining iron to make nails for the boat. They both worked hard and eventually entered the Iron Age. He thought that pyrite contained only about 40% iron, which explained why it wasn't widely used for industrial purposes. He was unsure how to explain this and then thanked Nick, asking if they could take a break and if she could help him make iron nails that afternoon. He considered that, even though he might not fully understand her language, her presence was still valuable to him. He remembered the condition in which he first saw her. After resting, in the afternoon, they poured the melted iron into the molds made by Lin, and as it cooled, nails were formed. While they were having their meal, Chin asked Lin if she had any news. She gave a lengthy explanation, suggesting that they build a cellar to store the fruits for winter. Chin acknowledged that it would indeed be troublesome if they lacked fruits during winter, but mentioned that building a cellar would be too difficult. He had an alternative idea. When Jessica asked what it was, he proposed making canned fruits. Food was always a priority for survival, so if building the boat was delayed, they could focus on making cans. Since glass was needed for canning and glass was made from quartz, they all went to the river to collect quartz. As quartz was ideal for making glass, Lin showed them something she had found. Chin and Jessica were shocked and wondered if it was gold. Jessica confirmed that it was purer than alluvial gold. Chin remarked that Lin was lucky to find such valuable material in a small river. Nick then revealed a large piece of gold, which astonished everyone. Jessica asked where Nick had found it. Nick pointed out the location, and they discovered signs of more gold worth millions. Lin wondered how the gold had ended up there and if there was any nearby ore. Jessica found a diamond, which Lin noted was so large that its value might exceed all the gold they had found. They speculated that they might be on a legendary island and that they could find even more treasure and become rich. However, Chin interrupted their excitement, saying that no matter how valuable these finds were, there were still more important tasks. He pointed out that there were other valuable rocks on the island and suggested they should focus on finding quartz. They spent the entire morning collecting a basket full of quartz stones, and they decided to take the gold and diamond with them in case they needed to escape from the island. Afterward, they completed the entire process of making the glass. In the end, Chin found that he had created some waste, but earned 1,500 points for the achievement. He mentioned that molding glass was not easy. He then asked Lin to give it a try. Lin took on the task and did an excellent job. She remarked that the glass could have been even better if she had spun it more consistently. Everyone appreciated Lin's skill in making the glass. Chin explained that the common method was to splash cold water on the glass before it cooled down and then break it with a knock. However, with their valuable carving knife, they could now simply cut the glass more precisely. Lin suggested that a rotating table would make it easier to shape the glass. Chin agreed and planned to build one soon. With the points he had accumulated, he could now afford the world language collection. He gave the finished glass to Nick for inspection. Nick was amazed, saying it looked like ice and was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Chin was pleased that he could now understand Nick and hoped to speak Arabic as well. He decided to pretend he was still learning the language to keep up the charade. Over the next few days, Jessica taught Chin and Lin Arabic. Lin worked hard to learn the language and was able to communicate a little in Arabic through her efforts. Chin and Nick collected nitrate soil and other materials to make bombs. During a meal, Chin suggested that since they had already made glass, they should also make a telescope to help them navigate and gather information. He noted that Lin was capable of making one. Lin explained that they would only be able to make a Galilean telescope. Chin outlined the entire process, but left the task of making the lenses and molds to her. Lin requested a clay molding machine. The next day, Chin constructed the machine. After it was complete, Lin used it to spin and cut the clay with a piece of bamboo, creating a relatively smooth, funnel-shaped pit. She then used leaves as sandpaper to smooth the surface and carefully pressed the funnel to make it round. Quia told Lin that making 5 would be more than enough. They then created convex and biconvex lenses. After adjusting them all correctly, Chin tested the telescope, and it was working well. Lin noted that the image was slightly distorted but still acceptable. Jessica mentioned that the telescope had a magnification of about 7 or 8. Chin said this was good enough, comparing it to a common binocular available on the market with a magnification of about 10. Nick, upon checking, was amazed and wondered if it was a divine eye. Chin earned 1,500 points for making the telescope. With the telescope complete, it was time to start on the boat. They moved to an open area with the wood, and Jessica asked which type of boat they would build. Lin replied that with only wood and nails available, their options were limited. Chin considered their options and decided they should build a catamaran. He explained the benefits of this design. Jessica mentioned that they should also make a sail, as using paddles would be laborious, and the boat would be easily affected by currents. She shared her experience of fishing offshore during college and her skill in handling sails. Lin also noted that Jessica was skilled at flying a plane, and Jessica appreciated the compliment from Lin. They all worked together to build the catamaran, and eventually it was complete. Jessica suggested that since the wind was favorable that day, they should sail out to sea. Chin earned 3,000 points for constructing the catamaran. That night, Nick looked at the stars, thinking of her father and hoping he would be patient. She was confident that Chin and the others would reach their tribe and save them. Lin approached Chin, asking what he was thinking. Chin mentioned that this would be his first sail, and wondered about navigating isolated waters near an unknown island. He asked Lin how she felt about it. Lin compared it to the excitement of a first car race, and said it was challenging but assured Chin that Jessica would handle everything. Lin was confident that everything would be fine, so Chin didn't need to be nervous. They shared a moment of silence before Lin wished Chin a safe journey. Chin reassured her not to worry. Just then, Jessica arrived wearing only a towel. She asked what they were talking about, and if they would mind if she joined them to share their feelings. Lin noticed Jessica's towel and remarked that it was quite small and barely covered her, revealing almost everything. The next day, they prepared to leave on the boat. Chin reminded Lin that they had stored enough food in the camp, so he asked her to stay behind unless absolutely necessary. Lin reassured him not to worry and said she would take care of herself and would do her best to protect the camp. Quan told Silly to look after Lin, and then they set off, promising to return soon. Lin understood why everyone wanted her to stay behind for her safety, but she felt a bit disappointed. She resolved to take good care of the camp and focus on making the cans, which she felt was the best she could do. On the boat, Jessica remarked on how cool the breeze was and asked Chin how he was enjoying the sailing. Chin replied that he was happy not to be seasick and relieved that he wasn't worried about a big wave sinking them. Jessica then asked Nick if she was all right. Nick confirmed that she was fine, and mentioned that since her tribe had settled in the area, they had learned to catch fish for survival, and sailing out to sea had become a normal part of their lives. Xia wondered if they were sailing farther from the shore. Jessica confirmed that they were, and explained the advantages of their route, assuring him that she would handle everything. As they sailed through the night, Chin asked Jessica how many miles they had traveled. Jessica calculated and said they weren't even halfway there. Chin hoped they would reach the other side by the night of the following day. Jessica stayed at the helm throughout the night, as no one else on board knew how to sail the boat. After a few hours, Chin woke up and realized he had only slept for 2 to 3 hours. Finding it difficult to pass the time, he decided to stay awake with her. They spent the rest of the night talking about her job and their experiences. The next day, as they approached the coast, Nick pointed out a beach and confirmed that they had reached the other side of the island. By evening, they arrived at the beach and set up camp. While sitting around the bonfire, Jessica asked Nick how far her tribe was. Nick replied that she had never been to their location before, so she wasn't sure, but she was confident they would find her tribe if they continued in the current direction. Chin then inquired about the other people on the island. Nick explained that those people were camping on the beach, but seemed to be searching for something on the island. They could appear anywhere, so they needed to be cautious. Chin advised everyone to get some rest, and that they would search for her tribe the next morning. The next day, they ventured into the forest. Sheena noticed that the vegetation on this side of the island was much taller compared to the area he was familiar with. Nick spotted some houses and mentioned that she had been there before, and now knew the way to her tribe. They hid behind some bushes, and Jessica asked why they had stopped. Nick explained that the tribe usually had guards around their cottages, but she hadn't seen any, which felt odd. Shinamata Dummy checked the area and discovered that there were many people around. He instructed Jessica to stay put while he and Nick went to investigate. Just then, Nick sensed something amiss and hurried towards the houses. The tribespeople were urging a man not to stop them, as Nick was missing, and he was their only hope of saving the chief. The man responded, advising against recklessness, explaining that they were outnumbered, and that many would be killed if they attempted a rescue. Just then, Nick arrived, asking them to remain calm. When they saw her, they inquired about her whereabouts, expressing their worry. They also asked if she was injured. A small boy approached Nick, informing her that the chief was missing, and many men had not returned. A man sitting nearby explained that since several men had not returned for a few days, the chief had led a group to search for them. They were attacked by bandits, and only one man managed to escape and return. Another man told him to halt further discussion, insisting they should accompany Nick to find the chief. The first man asked them to calm down, while a second man inquired about their next steps. Nick then asked them to be quiet and listen, explaining that she was not in danger during her absence. She had ventured through the Death's territory and reached the other side of the island, where she had met a wizard. They were all shocked and couldn't believe her words. A woman told Nick that it was enough with the joking and asked her to go to sleep. Nick insisted that she wasn't joking. Another man, angered by Nick's claim, asserted that she was the strongest woman in the tribe and the daughter of the tribe, so she should not rely on a man who didn't exist. He demanded that he take back the compliment he had given her. Nick responded that she didn't care about his compliment, but she had genuinely met a wizard. The man asked where the wizard was. Just as Nick was about to answer, Dummy swooped in quickly and landed on Chin's hand. Chin asked if someone was looking for him. They wondered if he was really a wizard, as he didn't fit their expectations. According to legend, a wizard was supposed to be a man chosen by the witchcraft god to be his envoy. Chin decided it was time to demonstrate his skills and show them his version of witchcraft, which he considered science. He then performed a fire display, which left everyone in awe. In reverence, they all bowed to him. Chin was taken aback by their seriousness. Kata stepped forward, eager to test Chin's strength. Nick explained that Chin had tamed a massive beast and a giant eagle, and had defeated a titan single-handedly. Kata's curiosity was piqued, and he demanded that Chin demonstrate his prowess. Chin realized he couldn't avoid the challenge. Using his swift cheetah skill, Chin moved so quickly that he was almost instantly in front of Kata, pointing a finger at him. The others were astonished, as no human could run with such speed. Kata was stunned, having witnessed Chin's arrival firsthand. Chin declared that he would use only 2 fingers, and Kata wouldn't be able to get up. Despite Kata's best efforts, he was unable to rise. Chin remarked that Kata was clearly using all his skills but still couldn't compete. The other tribespeople were shocked, as Kata was known as the strongest among them, yet he was nothing compared to Chin. Since Kata couldn't get up, Chin declined to accept his challenge. As Chin walked away, Kata glared at him before leaving. Chin thought to himself that he had been saved by luck and was relieved that Kata didn't challenge him to a duel. A man then asked Chin to guide them and provide assistance. Jessica arrived, urging everyone to leave their belongings and help Chin. Upon seeing her, the man referred to her as a witch. Jessica remarked that Chin was so skilled that he had been hiding his true capabilities, and she was curious about how he had learned his magic. She asked if he had seen everything. Jessica explained that Chin had been there for a long time, so she had sneaked in out of concern for him. She assured him that she wouldn't force him to reveal anything if he preferred to keep it a secret, and she found the mysterious aspect of his skills even more intriguing. Chin then informed them that the witchcraft god had heard their prayers and had sent him and Jessica to assist them. The tribespeople were overjoyed and expressed their gratitude to the witchcraft god. The man noted that it was already quite late and suggested that they follow him to their quarters. Chin reflected on how enthusiastic everyone was and admitted he wasn't used to being surrounded by so many people. The man led them to a room where they worshipped the witchcraft god and expressed his hope that Chin would find it satisfactory. Chin agreed and advised the man to return and get some rest. The man assured him that food would be brought to his room shortly. As Chin and Jessica entered the room, Chin remarked on how they were alone and expressed that he had never been treated with such respect before. Jessica then asked where Nick had gone. Jessica replied that Nick had gone to inform everyone about what had happened.